well, thanks to everybody for making the meeting tonight. And with that, I'll pass it over to either Sue, Janelle, or Sachin to get us started.
Hi, Sue Easterday here. We are going to open our meeting June 16th, 2021, 7 p.m. Council Chambers for the Stoner Prairie Park Planning Committee meeting. And our first item is our call to order, which we've just done. We are going to then do item 2 is approval of minutes from the last meeting of May 19th, 2021. Do we have?
Sue.
Oh, I'm going ahead. You want to do a roll call?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need a call first. Do we need a first and a second for the call to order?
So moved.
I didn't think so, but who's got a second?
I second.
All right, and I'll just run through the names on the list here again. Just let me know if you're here. Co-Chair Sue.
Here.
Lucas and Kelly.
Here.
Katie.
Here.
Janelle.
Here.
David Garter.
I don't think David is with us this evening.
Right. Ben.
Yeah, I'm here.
I know that Julie Musgrove from the school district indicated she would not be able to attend tonight. So Jane. Well, Jane. Pete. Well, Pete. Christopher.
Here.
Alder Udell.
Here, I'm in Chambers.
Joshua.
Here.
Garrett.
Yep, I'm here.
Sachin.
Here.
Mark.
Here.
And I know that Jeff indicated he would not be able to make the meeting tonight, so that is our attendance. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready? We're ready for item 2, approval of minutes of the May 19th, 2021 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to
So
approve.
moved.
2 firsts, so we'll give one a first and one a second.
Who
Second.
got that first?
I think it was Janelle. I'll second it. Udell.
That brings up a good point. When you do say your first and seconds, just say a last name so whoever's taking the minutes can get that. Thank you. Okay, is there any discussion about the minutes?
Yes, I would like to propose an amendment to the minutes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know the best way to do this, but I have a document here that the city staff informed me they could not send out last night because recreation programs have started. And I think that has some timestamps of our last meeting that show, what we were meant to accomplish during this interim period until the meeting tonight. And that's not what's reflected in the minutes here. And I verbally have informed city staff of that inaccuracy, and I also followed up in writing with a message. And so I would like to either, I sent that document to Scott Yarborough here in the chat. He can share that with everybody if he so chooses, or I can share my screen to bring that up to provide context to this issue. Furthermore, I would like to say that it was, as a member of the survey subcommittee, delaying this process against what we decided upon last time was something that I couldn't get my head around. So I can provide that context later when we review this feedback that came from the survey, or I could address that now within the same document.
If it's in the same document, should we just do it now?
Well, you can go ahead and read, if it's a addition, if you wish to add into the minutes specific words, you may read those words.
And just to clarify, what we are proposing is a a change to the minutes of the meeting for May 19th, correct?
That's right.
Is this
Here, you
is
can
this a
see-
screen, wait, is this a screen share, Sachin?
This is now a screen share
Okay.
to show the
Now,
the
I
minutes,
asked,
how they should be
one
reflected.
moment, you may read, but we're not doing screen shares of emails. Just, this is about the minutes of the meeting. If you've got
Right.
comments you'd like to make about what you believe to have been there,
Yes.
because we cannot incorporate an email into the minutes of last
Okay.
month's meeting.
I'll read it.
No,
If you,
can you summarize? Do you have any way of making a point without reading an email?
no,
Well, can
you said
we-
I could read.
Can't we just review it and then include the words? I don't think we're,
That's
oh,
what I
maybe
was
I'm,
thinking would be most efficient.
yeah.
Well, what would be most efficient is we're looking at the minutes from the last meeting, and there's a summary remarks that you believe are not there, that were missed. And so if you would summarize in the form
Sure.
that would fit with the minutes and take that off the screen, that is what should be
Sure.
done.
At 1:44, Sue Easterday, this is the hour in minutes in the meeting. If you need to go back and look at Fact TV to amend it that way, Sue Easterday said that time is of the essence for conducting the survey. And then shortly after there, Ben Lindbergh proposed the timeline for the committee to proceed. And so we talked about how, and you know, if you look back and the timeline that people were given for the committee to submit their feedback, they were given essentially a few days after our last meeting adjourned, with the idea that then the survey would commence. And so Ben proposed that shortly after Memorial Day, we would distribute that survey, and then this meeting would be when we review the survey results. And none of that is reflected in those minutes from May. And as I said earlier, I had my hard time wrapping my head around why a fellow co-chair would be interested in upholding this process when a question about the shelter and a question about a neighborhood that's invested heavily for this park and has survived a pandemic
Sachin,
without many options
Sachin,
for
I
their
would like to
children.
ask,
So we would like to address that as well.
okay, for the minutes,
Yes.
there was a process that was described in a certain part of the meeting, and you'd like that process inserted into
I
the
would like that
minutes.
timeline that the committee agreed to included into the minutes. That we would get feedback from the committee, the survey would be assembled, we would send it to Ad-hoc committee for feedback thereafter. Then we would distribute the survey shortly after Memorial Day. We would compile that feedback and share it at this meeting.
Okay,
That's
that
what
was
should be
that.
reflected in the minutes, and that was what was agreed to.
Sachin, that was 5 phrases. So let's get those into the minutes. The first one was, we were going to, now you've,
Well, like I said, it would be more efficient if I just shared this, so whoever's capturing this could
well, we've
capture
got,
those 5 phrases.
Chad is taking the minutes, and the first.
He has this document.
the
This was supposed
first-
to be shared to the committee, but
Chad
he could not get it out
is
in
taking
time.
the minutes,
I,
and the first thing.
I have the timestamp, if you will, and I can certainly add that to the minutes.
The timeline of the 5 phrases that were most recently spoken to be inserted into the minutes? Okay. Do we have any other additions to the minutes? Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes as amended, say aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we are on to public appearances for non-agenda items. We have 2 people here, Mayor Aaron Richardson and Acting City Administrator Misty Dodge. Should we take you alphabetically or by rank?
I'll go first.
Okay,
Misty is going to add probably to what I say. I am calling in today because I've heard from a handful of people on this committee. And first, thank you all for your time in this committee. And even just seeing the minutes there, I can tell that there's some problems on this committee. I've heard from various people about committee problems here and there, personality conflicts, and it's pretty disappointing that I have to deal with this. And I'm on here today. Sounds like there's questions about violating open meetings, treating others with respect, respecting other people's opinions. And frankly, I expect better from some of the people on this committee. You know, someone even today emailed me and asked about removing someone from the committee. Frankly, not one person would be removed. And if I have to remove a bunch of people, and I have that right as an ad hoc committee, I will do that. I'm going to watch the rest of this meeting. I'm not going to stay online, but I'm going to watch the rest of the meeting and keep an eye on this because, frankly, I expect a lot better from people on this committee. And I will do what I have to take care of these headaches. And it's just disappointing, I guess. And I expect more professionalism from everyone on here. And if the personalities are the problem, I'll remove them. And it's disappointing I have to be on here and say this, but it can't keep going. So I know Missy's gonna talk a little bit more about some of the procedures and stuff like that, and I'll let her do that. But thank you for those who've reached out, and I've got an eye on the whole situation, and I'll continue to monitor this, and there needs to be changes. So I just ask that people act a little bit more professional and treat each other with a little more respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have Misty Dodge, Acting City Administrator.
Yeah, so thank you all for letting me speak. I just wanted to share some process items with the committee, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So this is an officially government sanctioned city committee. And with that comes some strings and some requirements that we have to meet. And I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of what those are so that we can all work together to make sure that we meet those. So the first one I want to talk about is that open meetings requirements. So because this is a government committee, it's officially sanctioned, we have to meet the open meetings law. So there's kind of two things I want to talk about there. One is that any item that you want to have a discussion on, and definitely if you want to vote on something, it needs to be noticed on the agenda. It needs to be clear enough so that the public can look at that agenda and determine if that's something that they're interested in being involved in, so that they would know if they could come and speak on it, you know, similar to how I'm doing tonight, or if they wanted to talk to the committee about it and make sure that they're up to date on it. So those agendas are really important so the public knows what's happening with this committee. The other piece that comes with that is that it needs to happen at a publicly accessible meeting. So yes, we're on Zoom, but people are able to come to chambers as well and participate. The big reason I wanted to bring this up though is emails. I know email is very convenient to get your message across and to share ideas, but when you're on a government committee, an official one, emails is not a way that the committee can be doing business because the public doesn't have access to those emails at the time. So anytime that you are having a discussion about committee business, it really needs to be at these meetings when it's properly noticed and then it's also accessible to the public. Also want to talk briefly about open records. So I heard a little bit through the minutes about a survey. So you want to keep in mind, again, as an official city committee, that all of the documents of the committee are also subject to open records and need to be retained and available by your staff liaison. So the survey that goes out, any feedback, any responses, all of those things, anything that the committee wants to share at the committee, all of that needs to be provided to Chad so that he can retain it and it is available for open records. Same with emails. If you happen to be doing city business on your personal email, those are also subject to open records, and you will need to be able to provide those in the event that an open records request comes. So those are kind of the two things just wanted to make sure everybody's on the same page about. I also want to talk very briefly about the goals of the committee. So this is an ad hoc committee. You guys are providing really great input and guidance onto what this park should look like and what amenities it should have and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, this information is going to go to the Parks Commission and to the council, and it's really the council that makes those final decisions. So this is an important step in the process for sure, make sure people's voices are heard, but it's not the final decision-making power. And I just want to make sure that that was clear so that if there's any questions going forward, what the process will be. So this ad hoc committee will kind of wrap up your recommendations. You're going to provide those to Parks Commission, and they'll ultimately get provided to council, and that's the official format of how that information gets shared and what the recommendations are. That was all I really wanted to share. If you do want to have a more thorough discussion about this, I would suggest putting it on the agenda for your next meeting, and we can invite the city attorney to come out and answer any questions you have or provide any guidance for you. But just wanted to kind of get those rules out there so that everybody was on the same page.
I have one question. Misty. We as co-chairs speak with Chad and have spoken via email with the other person, Ben Lindbergh's worked on the surveys as well, to discuss how something's going to appear on the agenda, what attachments are going to occur, those types of things. Those are permissible discussions.
So in general, if you're talking about the logistics of the meeting, so what time it's going to start, can you attend, are you going to share your screen, or are you going to be in chambers, you know, that type of stuff, that's probably okay. I still would encourage you not to do it via email. But anytime you're talking about what the goal of the committee is, like what the content of things should be or what the discussion should be, that really needs to be at a public meeting so that the public can participate.
Okay. Are there any other questions of Misty Dodge?
Yep. This is Garrett. Hi. Thanks, Misty, for that info. One of the things we discussed last time about the survey was kind of anonymity and people being anonymous to their fellow neighbors. I think the parks, the parks folks said that was doable. So is that still the case? Because we want to make sure that the people that are doing the surveys are the right people. So we're recording, names, addresses, stuff like that. But is it okay to provide that to the parks people, but then have it not be accessible by just the general public? And I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely understand the question. I don't necessarily have the answer for you though. So it's really the city attorney would have to make that determination. But in general, that's not something that needs to be protected from the public. So my guess would be that they would say that that would be subject to open records as well, but the attorney would need to make that decision.
Okay, thank you.
So if I'm to understand what the question was once surveys have perhaps been wrapped up, everybody's from across whichever neighborhoods have answered. If someone really wanted to spend the time, they could do an open records request and see which specific answers and comments were provided by various people who answered that. Is that what the question was? Garrett?
Interpretation.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
Misty, can you take a moment and just walk us through a walking quorum and that conversation?
Yeah, so a walking quorum becomes an issue when the committee is doing business not at a public meeting. And so if you have a quorum of people, so that'd be a simple majority generally, and this is a large group, so that is a lot of people. If you have, say, half the committee somewhere else, not at a notice meeting, and they make a decision, that can't happen because it didn't happen at a publicly noticed and accessible meeting. Walking quorum is a little bit different because it's not as clear cut. It's not, say, 8 people sitting together having a conversation. Instead, what a walking quorum is one person goes from one group of people on the committee, has a conversation, gets them to agree to something, goes to another person on the committee, says, I had this conversation, this is what we're going to do, this is what we should do at the meeting, and then goes to the next one. So you're walking from committee member to garner votes or to get a consensus on something when all that discussion really needs to be done on the floor of that public meeting.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, then, thank you very much for attending. We appreciate your information.
Absolutely. And if you guys do have further questions, either reach out to me or to Valerie, the city attorney. We'd be happy to help.
Thank you. Okay, item 4 is our agenda review. We would need a motion to approve the agenda as it appears.
I'd like to add one item possibly.
Pardon me? Wait, I'm sorry. First. Oh, okay. Hi, Garrett.
That was Garrett.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this is Garrett. I'd like to add an item if possible regarding the cadence of meetings.
Unfortunately, we can talk with Chad and try to, or the chairs, we can't add anything to an agenda now because it's been publicly noticed. And
Okay.
we can't, I'm just sorry that we can't.
Okay.
Okay. So we have agenda items 5 through 7, and 8 is adjournment. So do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Did we get one?
I would like to make a motion to approve, but I'd also like to note that even though the draft survey is not specifically included in this agenda, it was previously provided to all of the members of this committee, so should be considered available in that mechanism.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Those in favor of approving the agenda as written? Aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Now, I will lead us through agenda items, and Sachin will be presenting, and Sachin and Ben presenting item C. The first thing to say, all of these things pertain in some way to the survey, and which is our goal, is to plan the park, and our specific goal tonight is to get the questions in order, if we can, for the survey. The most important thing is to make sure we are prepared by the end of July to let Public Works know what our shelter design is. So that's the biggest deadline, but the survey goes out on one piece, so we're going to work on it all tonight. An item came up that I noted just a few days ago on Saturday, and I gave the information to the mayor. It's about the question of whether or which neighborhoods answer the survey. And I had said at this most recent meeting, specifically Lacey Heights, North Stoner Prairie, Seminole Forest, and Crescent Crossing. And I may have said it more than once. And then I began to realize it wasn't quite sitting right with me, and it kind of hit me after I was asked one more time to confirm it. There was an email that was generated asking me. And so I went back to look at minutes of going back all the way to Parks Commission minutes from 2 meetings, October and November of 2020. And I also looked at our other minutes, or what I had for my notes from our own meeting minutes. And the upshot is 2 things have been said at the 2 different meetings of the Parks Commission in October. The Parks Commission had said that Janelle would be leaving. They made a motion that Janelle would be leading this group, and that the group would be North Stoner Prairie, Lacey Heights, and Seminole Forest. I think inferred in that it would have involved Crescent Crossing too. At the next meeting, in our packet and on our agenda, Scott Endel was walking us through next steps for the committee to do park planning. And there he explained that we had the half-mile radius of the park as an area park includes other neighborhoods. It includes Wildwood, Seminole Ridge, and he had a map that showed those. It's an older neighborhood map, so it actually, North Stoner Prairie, those words, or Stoner Prairie area, it doesn't show up but that's the epicenter of the map, so. And then finally, he had a draft letter that he was sending out to all those neighborhoods, and I don't know which ones responded or not. But as you can see, there's a dilemma. It doesn't affect anything we're going to do tonight to talk about what questions are going to be on the survey. The mayor had said he would review with the city administration and go over all the same things I just explained, and they would tell us who is going to receive the survey. So I'm sorry that happened, and I am also grateful to have found out about it and gotten it to this degree, so we all know about it now, and we can talk about the survey now.
Sue, can I jump in here, Sue?
Sure.
I mean, I'm just questioning as I'm trying to take notes here, you know, the agenda item that we're on, review of existing Stoner, you know, Stoner Prairie Park node with the,
Well, no, I'm not there yet. I'm just said I'm introducing the agenda items. So I'm just,
Okay,
I'm talking
but
about,
Point of
I,
order that,
but-
point of
but the-
order
but the
that
point-
this is not,
yeah,
yeah.
but the point
Okay,
is
yes, I
that
think
the
I see
first-
where
the
you're
first
going
agenda
here.
item that we,
yeah, I think I see where you're going here.
yeah, I'm just, you know, we have a posted agenda and that's what we need to stick to. And so, you know, 5A should be the topic of discussion right now.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay, what I'll do is everything I just said now, I will just shift to introducing 5C draft survey discussion. So I'll save everybody the pain of listening to it again, but we're going to start now, if that's all right, with Chad, 5A?
5A, correct.
Yep, okay, fair enough. All right. Now you have your packet with the attachments that occurred, or appear rather. I thought there might be a computer here for me to look at, but there isn't, but that's okay. This is just a review of part of the park, and the attachments that come with it are, first of all, a list of all the park parcels that are stitched together to create North Stoner Prairie. And this was an email that Scott Endel and I exchanged to just drill down on exactly how much acreage are we talking about and where does it come from. That was in December of 2020, and it's 10.39 acres. I had a question a day or two ago, does this include the lots where the shelter is likely going to be? And he said it didn't, and we agreed technically that may not be called parks, it may be called public works, but that's another 0.4 acres. So the total acreage of the park is almost 11 acres. And the node is 1 acre, and it is to the east of the north-south path, and it is also got some play equipment on it that we think is about 25 to 27 years old. And it's got some trees on it, and I asked staff to just do a very quick rendering of the trees. That's why you see the colored green and with polka dots on it. That's 1.804 acres, and that's the trees. The reason it's being discussed at all is I want you to know that, as was described by Misty Dodge, we're doing one part here. Parks Commission has to review all that, and the Tree Advisory Committee reports to Parks, and they have responsibilities in the comprehensive plan that relate to things that will also happen in this park. And it is about their requirement or their goal of maintaining or achieving and then maintaining a 30% tree canopy in the city's urban service area. And it had never been brought up before, and I'm just explaining now that we have a lot of nice trees here. Whatever budget comes to us in this process to add more trees is something they look forward to being part of planning and expanding the urban service tree canopy. And so Anna Healy was to have appeared, but she did just provide a quick written comment. I'll read this and then we can be done. She said she would like to thank everyone. Anna Healy is the city forester. I would like to thank everyone who has contributed to this park planning effort. I would like to make the following point for the committee to consider. Policy 1.3.6 of the City of Fitchburg Comprehensive Plan reads as follows, quote, develop a tree protection ordinance, a tree diversity plan, and a tree canopy of 30% of the urban service area, end quote. She goes on, park spaces are integral to reaching the 30% tree canopy goal. I look forward to working with you in planning tree planting locations to achieve this goal and realize the benefit of tree canopy. And then I had 2 follow-up questions, which I thought you might want to know or we should know. I asked if she had any information on ages of some of the trees, and she said most in that area, the 1 acre, where the tot lot is, the trees are roughly 15 to 25 years old. A few might be older. My second question was, when developing a tree and understory plan for an area like this park, open, formerly cornfield, how do you determine whether to create a heavily wooded space versus a savanna with relatively sparse numbers of oaks? And she answered, if we have, the number of trees we plant is mostly determined by budget and site conditions. If we have the money to plant a lot of trees, we plant long-lived trees, primarily oaks, with smaller trees at about a 30-foot spacing. If we do not have money for that, we only plant the longer-lived species. If the site is quite open and dry, we primarily plant oaks. This is a gross simplification, but you get the gist. So that, unless somebody has questions of me about that area, we can move on.
Not per se, but I do have a couple of things that I'd like to circle back on. So, you know, one of the first things that you mentioned is that we kind of have this refresh schedule that we use in conjunction with some of our parks. If I'm not mistaken, what I'm gonna call the little kids park that sits on the opposite side of the fence, elementary school, is probably within that window of a time frame to be refreshed. I would be curious if it is on the list, and so then that way we can consider that as part of this planning process as well. Chad, is that something that you can provide some assistance with?
I mean, I would have to get back to you. I don't know that answer right now, and I'm not sure if Scott's even on this call right now. I mean, if he is, he might have some comments, but otherwise I'd have to get back to you.
Hi, this is Garrett. What does it mean to be refreshed? I'm trying to understand why we're doing this and looking at this right now.
So from my perspective, what it means is that certain assets are going to age and they're going to need to be either refreshed or replaced or something of that nature. A swing starts getting tired and old. And I believe, you know, and that could be probably said for a number of pieces of equipment within our inventory. Based on what Sue had to say here, it's my impression that that little park is probably within that age of being eligible for that update or that refresh. And so that's why I would be interested, you know, it doesn't have to be tonight, but I'd be interested in staff's feedback about where that little park sits from a timing perspective. If we're going to go ahead and make some discussions around some improvements to this park, it would benefit us to know, for example, that maybe next year the plan is to go ahead and make updates there as well, so that we could factor those into the greater plan that we're considering here. So
Okay.
that's my ask, is to have, if staff can let us know, you know, it doesn't need to be tonight, but kind of where that's at, so we're planning and we're not duplicating efforts in some of those things.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I didn't know how that related to the trees and the canopy and all that stuff. So it seems like it's 2 different things we're talking about.
I will,
It is, and I've got some questions on the trees as well.
yeah,
Okay.
and Scott,
Janelle, this
Scott,
is Mark. While we're on the
could we
refresh,
wait, hold
do you know
off,
if that
wait,
refresh come with its own budget?
I don't have my,
typically that comes out of the standard budget instead of our budget, but I'm going to ask staff to confirm that.
Perfect.
Scott, can you help us with that one?
Certainly. I think, as members have indicated, that with the age of the current playground there, it certainly is within that time frame to be updated or replaced. In regards to the budget, we do have an ongoing CIP budget, which we do utilize to upgrade playgrounds and basketball courts and those types of things. So that in theory could be eligible for that separate CIP funding, independent of the park project that you're working on now.
Scott, how do we get more information around that? Namely, is it on the list? What
Uh,
would be
It
considered
is,
change?
it is not on the list, but that doesn't mean that list is fluid. And we do have a lot of different playgrounds that are in that same age group. So we typically will work first with neighborhoods that are interested in that refresh or update, kind of as a request kind of order. So certainly, to the point, if we're in the process of doing this park planning process, it would make sense to me that the Stoner Prairie Park existing playground would be moved up in the process due to the planning that this group is doing.
I would be,
Can I ask a,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Scott or Chad, and usually that's a preface to someone putting you on the spot, but could you give us a sense for, how do you determine what a refresh budget would be? If you had a ballpark it, given that it seems like the survey is going to be something that's going out pretty timely here with the shelter question in there too. So some color on that would be helpful.
Well, we have that budget is annually about $52,000 or $53,000, and we get that annually. And what we try to do is we try to do one refresh, typically a park, which will include the playground renovation, typically a basketball redo, where we redo the basketball court and the hoop. Which really pretty much takes up that $50,000 to $55,000 budget. So again, it basically would be, we have the CIP that's scheduled for 2022, which is going to be approved here shortly. But certainly, I think we would have the ability, if we wanted to do this one in 2022, to go to the council and do a budget amendment. And it really wouldn't be a budget amendment. It would be a reshuffling of which playground we work on for that specific year. So it certainly, that's a good point. I think that's another source of funding for the refresh of that playground.
Thank you.
What's our protocol for making our case to support that?
It's duly noted. I have a group that's interested in that update. So to me, I've been notified that the neighborhood is interested in that refresh. So it's noted.
And we'll be glad to have a bunch of people turn up and speak on that behalf, should it be requested.
That sounds fair.
Can I change subjects and talk about the trees? Thank you. So when I took a look at this, it was helpful to understand not only this piece, but how it integrates in. I had a couple of questions specifically regarding the trees. I read the content from the key pieces being on page 9, and a couple of things that popped up in my opinion. So it looks as though there is a ask of anybody that is considering development to think about the tree canopy as part of their planning and their decision making. Is it assumed that those trees would come out of our budget? Got it.
Making her remark that I read, she's saying it just depends on the budget we end up with. Is that the question you're asking?
So
Or am I in the wrong?
What I'm specifically trying to figure out is, I think we all appreciate the canopy. We're going to have a tight budget. And so as I take a look at the budget for tree, it's not inconsequential when I start thinking about how much space we have. You know, if we were doing our due diligence in that area, the cost associated with bringing that canopy in would be fairly large, given all of the other challenges we're gonna have on our budget. And so what I'm trying to figure out is if we've got grants or if we've got other resources so that maybe we provide consideration, but we're not responsible per se for the budget of those trees.
Yeah, I
I
understand.
could,
Go ahead, Scott.
yeah, those trees would be, the project dollars that we have available would be available for those tree purchases. Our tree budget is very limited, so to utilize, so I guess the quick answer is that the tree purchase would come out of the dollars that are allocated for the development of the park.
Are there other?
If I could just chime in, the separate to this process, but I've been in conversation. There's a speaker, by the way, on tree diversity tomorrow associated with the city of Fitchburg. And so in consultation with him and Anna about tree diversity, you know, one of the things that we haven't been doing in the past is, you know, using kind of bare root trees. They have a higher failure rate, but they're much more cost efficient. And so, you know, we could explore some things around that. And, you know, you don't get instant canopy even with a $300 tree. This is something you're investing in. But so there could be some compromises to be made between the idea of buying the trees that are old enough where we think we set them in and they survive, or the doing more diverse specimens and adding to the tree diversity and the future canopy, the interest, the beauty, the resilience if something else comes along, like, you know, invasive non-native species. So that's an option too that's more cost efficient. I think a bare root specimen costs $25 versus the $300 that a 1.5 inch caliper that the city usually buys. So that's 6 for 1. So we have to keep that in mind when we think about the tree budget and things for shrubs and planting beds also.
Within the city framework, do we have a mechanism where we pursue grants or things of that nature that we might also ask to have our name considered around?
I don't know that answer. And if Scott hasn't chimed in, it might be something we'll have to ask Anna to get back to us about. Does that sound fair?
There certainly are grants that are available. And, you know, it does come to capacity at some point on, you know, because they do take management and upkeep and reporting and those kinds of things. So they're certainly available. But there is some, you know, some capacity issues that come related to those grants and their applications and their management thereof.
Thank you. Those are the questions I had.
Other questions?
I would definitely, on that topic, I would definitely make a case for the fact that I do think incorporating some level of tree planting should be a key piece in this project. I think that full canopy trees and mature trees as this park, you know, grows with the community is one of the biggest appeals. And I think one of my biggest challenges in Madison is the fact that I feel like we are losing mature trees at a rate and we're nowhere near replacing them. And so I would argue for whatever mechanism makes the most sense with the budget, you know, whether that's bare tree and kind of overplanting with the idea that there's going to be some loss or there's going to be some culling, and that's, you know, that's going to be part of the equation. But when I think of some of the best parks in Madison, I think about the fact that you go pull a picnic table underneath one of those trees, or you go lay out like a blanket under one of those trees. And so I like the open space of Stoner Prairie right now, but I think that's one of the biggest drawbacks is a lack of change and a lack of canopy. And so I would say that brings way more of a draw to that park and makes it more versatile, in my opinion.
Yeah, Josh, this is Mark. We've talked about that in the neighborhood as well, saying, you know, as this park develops, you know, it was cornfield. There aren't big trees. And so we'd love to get some planted. and it's deciding what's the budget. I know that we've had neighbors, in the neighborhood here that have said, hey, if we can adopt a tree, let us plant one, and I can tell my kids to go run down there and water it or check on it, try to get them tired. But then we can watch it grow, and my kids can say, I planted that 10 years ago. I mean, I love that idea. And I think, at $300 a tree, yeah, it's doable. At $25 a tree, shoot, let me plant a row, and let's get some windbreaks. Let's get some areas near the shelter. I think that's great.
And to that point, I do think that there are other mechanisms. I think there are community-based mechanisms. There is a grant program through the Friends of Dane County Parks, but it would involve, establishing a 501c3, making an entity around Fitchburg Parks, applying for something like, there are mechanisms that, to other people's points, take a lot of maintenance, take a lot of additional effort, would not be in the scope of this committee. So I would argue that some of that should come out of this, and then other of that should be the legacy of this committee, right? Looking into what it's going to take to get grants to plant those trees in, places like Stoner Prairie that, right, as somebody who plays Frisbee there, the wind is intense, right? There, when on windy days, it's almost, can be displeasuring because it is so intense. And so some stands of trees and some ability to get away from that would again add some element to that, and it is very appealing in some of the other Fitchburg parks that you get a stand of hickories, and it's just it adds such an element to the park.
Thank you. I'm glad to see so many people are interested in the idea of trees. Another thing that we've been kicking around is the budget for everything is very kittywampus, out of control, you name it, from building materials to the cost of trees. So it's going to be down the road difficult to figure out exactly how to manage that. We do have our landscape architect in the group who is also a Parks Commission member, Christopher Sina, and I know that he'll be working with the city forester and Katie McDonald, who is a parks designer, when we get the survey questions back and create some design options for this committee to look at. It's duly noted that we'd love to be heavy on trees, but not break the budget at the same time. Are there any other comments about this agenda item?
Just that it doesn't say we want to be heavy on trees. We want good appropriate tree coverage.
Yes, of course.
At the appropriate spots.
Yes. Oh, no, don't put that in the minutes. Don't put that, I said heavy on trees in the minutes. So then, any other comment?
Question for Christopher. Do you have any recommendations for best practices in that area or feedback on the conversation that you've heard from this team this evening around tree selection, price points, et cetera?
As far as price points as far as tree selection, that really all depends on, as the design takes shape and comes together, different species will be more appropriate for different places in the park. Some areas you would maybe want something more ornamental. Other areas you may want big shade trees. Other places you may want evergreens for breaking things up. So the species I would imagine and like to see to be a pretty varied mix. Biodiversity is always a good thing, as well as multi-season interest for those who use the park. Ultimately, variety is good, diversity is good. As far as size at planting, that would probably come down to the budget we have delegated to plants, and then probably, getting as many as we can for that budget. I don't myself have a lot of experience with bare root trees, but when it comes to ball and burlap trees, I do know often the smaller size B&B trees, which are more affordable than the really large ones, can become established more quickly and in time overtake those trees that were planted at a larger size. So you don't have quite the gratification of a bigger tree right away, but as a long-term investment, it could be smarter. Those are all things to keep in mind, but they're things that probably would coalesce as the design started to take a physical shape.
Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate it.
Anything else from anybody? Okay, well, we'll close discussion of 5A. 5B is use of open space by outside groups or entities. And there was an attachment to this addition that I'm going to find in my stack. But it's what I was referring to as a Q&A of the various users of the open space on the southern half of the main body of the park. It is where Madison Ultimate Frisbee plays. It's where other more competitive Ultimate Frisbee groups may have tournaments. It is where softball teams may rent the space for practice. It's generally not used for games. And the school itself uses the space for some of their activities during class time. And in amongst all that, there might be future groups that make use of that field as well. And so I'm going to make the assumption that people read the Q&A that was put together. And I started doing that over time just for my own knowledge, because when I got started here, I didn't know anything about Ultimate Frisbee or how the fields were being used. And it was for my own satisfaction, and it just comes in handy here. Our member, Mr. Schramm, Pete Schramm, is not able to be here tonight, but in place is Robin Fenning, here to answer questions about MUFA in place of Pete Schramm. So if there are questions that do not relate to Ultimate Frisbee, let's start with those. Do we have any questions relating to other uses of the open field space?
I just had one small thing for those who are at home watching and perhaps reviewing this piece. Specifically, we're looking at pages 11 and 12 in the package. So what you're going to see here is perhaps Chad asking a question, and then it poses the question, or Pete is asking a question. So, so specifically, Chad Q is not a person. Chad Q is Chad with a question. So just kind of more as a point of order.
Yes.
Actually, I can comment on that. These were questions that Sue had, sent to myself and Pete. And so the Chad Q is the question directed to me with my follow-up answer. And
A is what that person answered. Thanks. And I'm sorry, Chad, I cut you off. You were going to say more?
No.
Okay, sorry about that.
I have no questions.
Hi, this is Garrett. For the fields, in addition to the Frisbee group, what other groups would use the open fields or have historically?
There is a competitive Ultimate Frisbee group that's not related to Madison Ultimate Frisbee Recreation that, if I'm understanding what Pete had written or told me.
I can answer that.
Yes,
my
go
name's
ahead.
Robin. I've had my video camera off for most of the meeting just because it seemed odd to have somebody who is not normally part of the meeting.
Okay,
kind of in
Robin.
the background.
Sorry, Robin, go right ahead.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Okay, thank you. MUFA obviously sanctions leagues in Madison. So league play only takes place Monday through Friday, typically in the Madison area. Groups that might reserve the facility for tournaments, or also there's some youth groups that might use it both for tournaments or for practices that I would say that I would liken them. They're called club teams. So club teams compete either regionally or nationally in a non-pandemic COVID year. Typically, teams are hosting tournaments or traveling to compete for tournaments 2 to 3 times per month from June to like October is kind of the main season. But I think that early season opportunities to kind of like gear up for for the club season is typically how the local competition for club teams typically work. And so my understanding is that like club teams, either single teams or in combination with multiple teams, will try to have some more local tournaments to gear up for like the big nationally competitive season. And I know that sometimes there might be groups that are like associated with the university, but not the official university teams, like the club teams, will also organize tournaments as well. But to be clear, there's not very many tournaments that get organized locally. I think, as Chad mentioned, perhaps about 4 tournaments in a given year. But that's kind of a way to think about it differently between what a club competition is versus MUFA's leagues.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know with the different groups. I wasn't aware that there was multiple groups that use the facilities. For the Fitchburg staff, what about other like non-ultimate Frisbee leagues or tournaments? Is there any other groups or anything else that uses those fields or that open area?
Yeah, Garrett. It's pretty infrequent. We may get a group that says, "Hey, we're looking to use the field for a day," but it's not it's not really a consistent thing. It might be one this year, and they may never reserve it again from us. From the rec department standpoint, we do a little bit with the ball diamond, depending on the demand we have with the number of kids registered for some of our baseball programs. The biggest challenge, or I guess issue up to this point, in terms of maybe why we haven't used it more, is the restroom or lack thereof, in terms of having kids activities out there and no place for them to use the restroom. So hopefully that gives you a little insight.
Okay, thank you.
And then I think we have some additional detail from Verona area schools on their usage as well of that space.
Yes, on the document, the Q&A document, they use the space during class time for a softball or kickball or open fields for things that they might play there. It's not real often because they've got a lot of their own space, but they'll from time to time make use of the fields, I'm told. And then softball teams may rent for practice if they'd like, but Chad, there's no games there, correct? No scheduled games there.
Yeah, we haven't had games per se out there. Again, teams can obviously rent it. But kind of going back to what I mentioned before, it's not as high of a demand there just because of the lack of facilities, i.e. restrooms.
Okay, thank you.
So, given these different entities that are using what I'm going to call generally is the park and rec space within the land utilization concept, I'm assuming if we maintained what we had for the size of that space, that would continue to meet the needs of the different stakeholders in this?
Yeah, speaking from MUFA, from our perspective, just like I'd say a little bit about the various groups that MUFA typically has on our field reservations. In the spring, we have historically held a women's developmental league where there's like skills clinic, learn to play prior to games. That space is really nice because we can kind of, it's a smaller group, but we typically use 2 fields. And I think it's nice because of the wind that someone previously mentioned. It's nice, for beginners that we can kind of change the orientation of the field because the space is big enough that we can do that. So we don't have to force brand new female identifying players to throw directly into the wind, which is, it's intimidating for even the most experienced players. We also typically held youth programming there. We do a lot of middle school kind of learn to play leagues there in the spring as well. And then I think at least once a week, it's adult We use either the normal women's league or a normal men's league will play there with 2 to 3 fields maybe. And then during the summer, it is a mixed ultimate league. So men and women playing together. And so we do have, some teams that are primarily high school aged players as well as adults. So I think that so when you look at like the number of fields that Pete answered, I think on the bottom of page 11, we typically do use 2 fields, but sometimes we may use 3 or 4 in this space. If we're able to have that same amount of space, we're able to serve, I think, the same number of stakeholders to answer your question specifically.
Got it. So just circling back, I think what I'm hearing is because we are, one of the things that we're doing through the course of this process is we're actually expanding the size of the park, but we're trying to get some other functional uses within the park. And so confirming that really if we maintained the same footprint for what we currently have for Parks and Rec, whether it's MUFA, whether it's Verona, whether it's the city of Fitchburg or otherwise, maintaining that same footprint in our planning should continue to meet the need.
Yeah, and I think too, even seeing some of the plans for the additional like add-on space, when we do our youth programming, youth spaces tend to be a lot smaller than the adult spaces. So, honestly, even some of the spaces that you guys are expanding, if it were available for us for youth programming, I think that we would maybe ask to maybe expand some of our use, but if it was allowed, but at least maintaining the footprint would allow us to continue to serve. And I think again, we primarily use this space in the spring for trying to do a lot of outreach and development with both our women's leagues and our youth leagues. So at least maintaining the same space is a huge thing for us because it definitely enables a lot of new players to get active. And we're getting a lot of interest in youth players this year. It's really exciting to see, I think, after the pandemic, to see the large number of kids who want to get active. And I think parents looking for an accessible, low cost sport. I think the one thing I kept hearing is that there's other groups that don't use the space because of the lack of the facilities. That's the great thing about Ultimate is if we just need an open space, we don't need to get super fancy. Maintaining that open, flat space really does allow a lot of users to play the game. So we're happy with the facility as it is, but the trees sound great. I think it'll be nice to block some of the wind and to get some of the shade as well. I'm sure Pete has said the same thing.
A regular bathroom would be a major boon for MUFA's efforts in that
Oh
space
my
as
gosh,
well.
yes.
So those
yes.
2 things I know are huge boosts for what goes
Right.
on there already.
Yeah.
So,
regarding
this
the space,
discussion is, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the space, has MUFA looked at other parks, in Fitchburg specifically? I can think of like McKee and some other ones that are pretty big and kind of set up for that. The only reason I mention that is, MUFA's been playing at this park for probably years, but now the dynamics changed with the neighborhoods right here. So it's a little different just because it was used previously for something, maybe it's not the best fit to use all that space for the exact same use moving forward.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry, I'm happy to Chad, if you'd like to answer
yeah,
that one.
I can just share with you, Garrett, that MUFA does use other locations within the city of Fitchburg. I believe the spring, they do use Swan Creek Park. And then in the fall, they do use kind of the outfields, if you will, of the ball diamonds at McGaw Park. So those would be the two other locations that they've used of recent.
Yeah, and we try to, I think part of the logic is, trying to rotate our field use so that we're not, tearing up or putting any undue maintenance, needs for any park. And we, in the other community, we do obviously rent in the city of Madison. We do the same thing where we rotate our field usage throughout the year to make sure that we're kind of spreading out our usage across parks as opposed to intensely utilizing one year round, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is this a good opportunity to look at like McKee Farms, Chad, and kind of see if there's other options, or, you know, to kind of spread the love of the MUFA, just considering, you know, this park is barely over 10 acres. So it's, you know, technically is an area park, but it's on the smaller side, you know, and there's really only so much space for things here. So, you know, just because it's always only been done at 3 different parks, is there a way to look at, you know, if we just need an open space, which it seems like that's all we need, is there other places to go and utilize at times?
Yeah, you know, certainly. I mean, McKee Farms Park being a community park, you know, anybody who's been there on any summer day or evening would tell you how busy it is with activities. But, you know, I guess that would probably be a little bit more of a question to MUFA, because, you know, there's a lot of open green space throughout the city, you know, and if you're just needing green space, you know, there's probably some additional options or opportunities.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things that we do try to take into account into our league scheduling, we do have teams sign up. Again, depending on the league, we have different formats for how teams sign up. In spring league, we sign up in like groups of 4 to 5, and then or up to 4 to 5. You can also sign up as an individual, and then we place you on a team. And then in summer, you sign up as a full team. But we do have teams that indicate if they have a lot of parents. So like in spring, where we split men and women into separate leagues, we do try to have quote unquote parent teams, so that they can share childcare responsibilities during games. So having parks that have multiple field spaces kind of enables us to allow families to continue to participate even after they have kids. We do have some membership data more focused on our female players, but that is definitely something we try to do just to make sure that we're making the sport accessible to women, because women tend to stop playing sports after they have children. So that was something that we've gotten a lot of really good feedback on over the years, is that shared sideline, especially where we have the single gender leagues in the spring. Additionally, we do the same type of thing in the summer. We're not doing it this year just because of the additional, we tried to keep like pods of teams a little bit smaller, I would say, just with COVID precautions for our first part of our summer league. But we do typically try to do the same type of thing where people can kind of, you know, bring their kids, and there's more sideline, you know, opportunities for childcare while parents are playing. So as we're like looking at fields, we do try to pick sites that we can at least get 2 fields. We try to preference sites that we can get at least 2 fields at for that reason.
And if I could give a little bit of context to this too, you know, I played MUFA for over a decade. My wife has played for the last 4 years. We've got 2 kids now, so we're part of that parent league. But the bigger, I think, element for this is that MUFA is what brought me into Fitchburg as a recent graduate and as a young professional here. And it's what drove me through Seminole Forest. It's why I live here now. And so the pull of a large number of young people to Stoner Prairie multiple seasons a year. Again, MUFA can field up to 4,000 people in the summer. They're using pretty much every green. I mean, we're certainly open to more conversation with the city of Fitchburg. I think we're always looking for new fields. But I want to get across to this committee that, like, I'm on this committee because of MUFA, and I live in this town, and I have all this passion now for Fitchburg because I came to that park for 10 years and played Frisbee there. So I do want to reinforce that it's a big pull, and it's a regional pull. You get people from all over the county who come and play Frisbee there on a regular basis and get to see Fitchburg and get to, you know, get engaged.
I would like to, go ahead, Scott.
If I might just offer a general a comment from a staff perspective, maybe objectively, that you know, in theory, the new park, which is being created by the Stoner Prairie development, to some degree should be the consideration of the group. The existing park, which MUFA certainly plays, you know, currently plays on, is kind of from the existing older park. So in the idea of interest, you know, just as I would suspect the Stoner Prairie neighborhood group would be protective of the new parkland that was associated with their development, I would assume that MUFA, in fairness, would also be protective of the areas that they've used throughout the years. So just to bring that perspective to the conversation.
And Scott,
Right, I think this
I
is a
would,
really
this is,
unique parcel though, so,
excuse
I
me,
mean, I think we have to
Sachin?
understand that, yes,
I was speaking, so I would just like to add to Scott's comments.
I'm a
And then
co-chair also.
I'll be quick. I'm just going to add to what Scott was saying, and then the point to remember also is that the open space between the school's open space all the way up to the first base line of the softball fields is in use by the school. So we leave it open anyway. They use it, and so it would never be the case that we would load up everything that they might want to use with trees. So it's going to be open for play, whether it's MUFA or other groups. And I had one question quickly of Robin, just to verify again, for example, for the summer, the number of days a week that you play there now, and roughly the hours each day that are being used.
I'd have to look back at, I apologize that my memory pre-COVID is a little bit fuzzy. Right now we're utilizing it, I know, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, as we have the league on Tuesdays and Thursdays historically is the biggest summer league. On Mondays and Wednesdays, so on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would say that there's probably at least 2 fields being used at both 6 o'clock and 7:30 p.m. And then we adjust our game times up by 15 minutes in July as the sun starts setting a little bit earlier. So
the second game would end what time roughly?
About 8:45
Okay.
at the latest.
So from
and
6
then
p.m.
later in
till-
the summer, it would be closer to about 8 o'clock.
So about a 3-hour period of time on the nights that you're there is when all the games are occurring.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 3 to 4 hours. Yeah.
Okay, that's, okay, now Sachin had some questions to add.
Sachin, I think you're muted.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, no questions, but to follow up to Scott's point, you know, this idea that there's separation, right, between the new neighborhood park and the, you know, MUFA existing fields at the middle school also changed. But we have to realize this is a very unique parcel. You know, multiple neighborhoods, but also the reciprocity that is great with the Verona Area School District. But the things that we are talking about, such as a shelter and maybe parking, would certainly intersect both those, you know, users and use cases for the park. And so I don't think we can kind of talk about them as separate things. That's why this is on the agenda, is we have to, you know, openly discuss. And it doesn't just affect MUFA. It of course affects any large scale events that happen. But, you know, certainly, I mean, I think Josh has already mentioned it, and Robin herself, right? The bathrooms would be a huge boon, right? But, right, so, but that's in this newer parcel that we're talking about. It's not in the old parcel, the bathrooms, right? And that's being afforded by the communities that are funding this park. So I think that you can't separate the two parcels in that manner, and we have to understand that. So my question would then be for MUFA specifically, because, you know, you have not again to point fingers at MUFA or put MUFA on the spot, but at the same time you have a lot of representation and have been the most heavy, I think, regular user of the park in terms of league. So, you know, the reciprocity with VASD is there. To what degree do you inform your residents, you know, where to park and how to use the environs of any fields that you play at? And, you know, what are the pre and post activities for league play in the environs of the fields you play at?
I mean, as somebody who has been playing MUFA since 2008 or 2009, I would say at the actual park parcel, I typically arrive to a game 30 to 45 minutes early. If there's a game going on, I'll be doing my warm-ups. I've had 5 knee surgeries, so I have to warm up for the rest of my life for any activity I ever do. I'll play a game. I will take my cleats off, maybe talk to my teammates a little bit for 10 or so minutes, maybe get some extra throws if it's windy, just to practice. If it's late, if it's the second game in a summer league, I'm definitely leaving because it's gonna get dark and I don't want to drop my keys along the way. I would say historically, I have parked at one of the 2 school spaces, and we are sponsored by the Great Dane. So if it's in the summer, I'll typically get dinner with my teammates at the Great Dane after the game pretty quickly, because the sooner you get there, the more likely that you're going to be able to sit with your friends and your teammates and build community. Otherwise, you're scattered across in smaller groups and tables. So that would I would say encompass how I typically have used the field. I guess I don't know what else.
Robin,
So
as a follow-up,
oh, go ahead, Mark.
we're going to ask the same thing. As a follow-up, Robin, would it be possible for MUFA to include on their maps that people coming should park at the school? The neighborhood is used, as a racetrack, getting to and from parking at the corner near the park. And there's a lot of kids that don't look both ways. And I don't want them weeded out already.
Yeah, I guess my question, since 2009 or so, I don't think I've ever been to a game where both of the parking lots are full. I guess
I would say the majority of people are parking in the schools already. I've played about the same amount of time as Robin. There has never been official guidance, but there have been asks of players at specific locations to conduct themselves in certain ways. So the one that comes to mind is North Star. There was an ask that, the noise be reduced as people were leaving in those kind of later games. And I know players respected that. As a team captain, as somebody who was there, I made sure players respected that. I'll tell you right now, as a community, MUFA is incredibly indebted to this area and understands what it means to conduct ourselves in a respectful manner. And so I think that, all that being said, if there's a request by these neighborhoods for MUFA to primarily use those parking lots, it's an organization that could never enforce something like that. I'll say that right out, is that there's no way for them to go in and kick people off the organization because they didn't park somewhere. However, on a voluntary basis, they have asked people to do things in certain communities, and it has been well received and it has been well conducted. And so I would say that if that's an ask that's made to them and is communicated to people playing at those fields, I would expect pretty good participation.
I think to go off of that, the North Star Park example is a great example. I mean, we are able to tell which teams are playing at any given field at any given night. And if there is any complaints ever, we have contacted captains directly. And if that behavior has not been corrected, we have gone so far as to remove teams from our leagues. So we do take our partnership with neighborhoods very, very seriously, because without the use of our parks, we're nothing. I mean, we can't exist without space to play.
If I can just add to that a footnote, in a previous life, I was the alder for this area. And so I had a chance to reach out to the people that live across the street and say, how does this go with these folks? What's been your experience as far as traffic coming in, speed coming in, just kind of a consideration for the neighborhood that they're coming into? And she had nothing but kind things to say about the group and how mannerly they were and considerate. And they've lived there for 20 years. So as long as you guys have been using your park, she would be able to witness that.
Thank you for saying that. I very much appreciate that. If you don't mind, I will take that feedback back to the rest of the MUFA board, because I think that's something that my fellow board directors would like to hear. So thank you for sharing that.
That's not me. That's Katie Kirst in the white salt box right across from the park. So that's where that comes from.
I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I know that whenever our teams, the teams that I've been on throughout the years, if we get to a park and there's trash, we're picking up the trash. We do things that, it's not glamorous and we don't expect to get thanked for, but I think there's a lot of little things that over time that ultimate players have done to make sure that we're leaving the space better than we find it.
we're grateful for that. You know, when anybody comes in and treats our backyard like they would treat theirs, we're grateful for that.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I actually had one thing for you, Sue. So one thing that you mentioned regarding the that area by the ball field is that it's going to stay open because of MUFA usage in the school. So
No, I
I guess,
meant,
how is that decided? That's
well,
the first I've heard that.
what I mean by that is, in partnership with the school, the reciprocity, in this Q&A package, I asked Julie Musgrove, who's the person, who's our contact person from the schools, to find out how and if the schools use that softball diamond and the open fields that are not part of their school property. And her reply is in that Q&A that they do, for some curriculum purposes, use it. So what I meant by that was to say, we would be mindful of how we treat the space because the schools are demonstrating a need for it to stay as is, to a point.
Okay.
I mean, I'm gonna see what Katie McDonald and Christopher Sina come up with when they do park renderings after we get the survey questions back. But I'm sure they would be referring to this type of information. They might even contact Julie Musgrove from the schools to get more questions answered as they put together some plans for us to look at later.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I just thought it was 100% decided that we weren't going to put anything anywhere on that field. And that seems a little excessive because if they're using the softball diamond, that makes sense. I don't think we're looking at changing that. If they're using part of the field for kickball, you know, that makes sense too. But there's plenty of space there if we want to put some amenities closer to the path, at least in my opinion.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else?
I think the only other question, probably for Robin, is just, do you feel that if we had restrooms here and the same number of fields that you currently have, would that make you more competitive for bringing in more tournaments locally?
Oh, honestly, yes. I also serve on the board of directors for USA Ultimate, and which is the national governing body for Ultimate Frisbee, a roughly 60,000 member organization in a pre-COVID environment. But part of our bid award process is the types of support facilities. Historically, I do think that some groups, when hosting tournaments, have secured, most of them have secured the porta potties or whatnot to support that. But there are, it does make any bid, if Fitchburg wanted to make some bids to host some events of regional significance and actually bring in some good amount of money, that is something that would make a bid more competitive for an official sanctioned USA Ultimate tournament.
That was my follow-up question to sweeten it for the city, is there's money involved in this too, right? That you'd bring in and spend money when you bring those people from out of town.
Absolutely.
So Robin, are you looking at like 3 fields? Is that what is currently over there?
I think there is space for 4, where the 4th field, so 3 fields will run in one direction and the 4th field runs kind of perpendicular to that field. And to be completely honest, yes, there's no minimum requirements for a MUFA league, but say if you'd like to have a regionally competitive tournament, having at least 4 fields is the bare minimum, just based on tournament formats typically being scaled for 16 teams typically. So having 4 fields enables an organizer to have competition rotating for pools a little bit easier. And the formats for brackets are, and again, for a regionally competitive tournament, the formats for brackets are determined in part with USA Ultimate, and they try to do it, by fairness and whatnot. So 4 fields is kind of like the minimum for that type of event.
Okay, what's in use right now? 3, and what has been used?
MUFA has again used up to 4 fields in some years, and that really does fluctuate with the number of teams per league. So I would say in an average night, there's at least 2, but could be as many as 4. And that again is depending on the league and the size of said league.
Have you looked at the space in front of the middle school now to see if there's any additional field could be up there? Like, have you looked at the other spaces other than just
Chad,
the parcel by the ball field?
I do know that I'm not sure if when you say the space in front of the middle school, are you saying on the side there that would be kind of adjacent to, I think, where maybe their gymnasium is, just because it looks like it has a taller ceiling? I've never been inside of the school because
Okay.
the school is closed. So do you mean like on the side there? There are soccer goals that are permanently in place that are actually like fixed to the ground on the side there of the Savannah Oaks. If we're talking about the same school in the same area.
I don't think so, but I guess it's more, have you looked at the school space to see what can be utilized there, considering, these leagues and tournaments would all be during off-school hours?
I can't say that I've personally gone and inspected and, measured to see if we could put a field there. For point of reference, an ultimate frisbee field is the playing field is 70 meters long, and end zones are 20 meters on each side, and then by 40 yards wide. So I would have to go and measure and walk out to make sure that the site would be appropriate for adult competition. It may be suitable for, youth competition or a youth league or a learn to play type league. But we definitely have to go do some spot checking to make sure that, again, I know that there's some permanent equipment kind of closer to the middle school. So I can't say right now.
Okay, I would like to try to draw this to a close, because some of these questions really stray a little bit away as far as other areas that they may play at. But I appreciate all the questions, good answers. Is there an objection to moving ahead then to our next item?
Thank you for joining us, Robin. I'm all set.
Yes, thank you, Robin.
Thank you very much for your time. We
you.
really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the committee. So thank you. I'm just going to turn my camera off, but I might, stay tuned in so I can pass some notes on to Pete.
Okay, agenda item 5C, draft survey discussion. Earlier, I gave a long remark about a complication or an unanswered question about which neighborhoods will receive the survey recipients, be the recipients of the survey, and that question has been passed off to the mayor, who is handling that with city administration. So with that, we will go to the draft survey discussion. Sachin is taking that area and is going to screen share at your own house. If you're pulling up the survey from your link, might be helpful. And then, but Sachin also has that. And there are just a couple of comments that came through.
Yes, I can take over that part, Sue, as I am, heading this agenda item. So now, Scott Yarbrough, I sent the written feedback, if people want to follow ahead, in the chat. Have you sent that along to everybody else? I was asked by Sue to compile the written feedback to date. The survey subcommittee was as of yesterday. So I compiled that and sent that to Chad. But he was not able to forward that, the parks. So has Scott shared that with all of you, the written feedback on the draft survey?
Sachin, where will we find that?
It should be in the chat if Scott has shared that with you.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat yet.
Yeah, it only lets me to send it to. It only lets me send it to Scott Yarbrough. I think he has to forward it to everyone else, the way the Zoom is set up. So, I think, first of all, let me stop this. I think the first thing I'd like to say is when we look at the feedback, I'd like to start with this feedback first, because I think before we review the survey, we can at least see what the feedback was. And we can keep that in mind as we go through the survey instrument. And the nice thing is when Ben and I received the input from the committee, I think the nice thing in drafting the survey was that there's a lot of similarities between what people thought we should be asking. So in a sense, that was a somewhat easy process. For instance, Lucas and Kelly, they wrote in about how important it was to show context, that people don't have a sense for the space, and we should be exhibiting zones and use cases so that people really understand, especially given how there's calls to expand perhaps even the neighborhoods that are involved in the survey effort. I think it's important then for people to be given and shown context around what the neighborhood possibilities are. And so has that been shared yet, Scott?
I think
Yarbrough? Okay. I can screen share it too. Let me just do that. I'll save you that effort. I'm also a chair.
The page 1, Sachin, there is
Yes.
the comments that were provided back to you. I'm asking you to clarify this for me. Those are
Yes.
comments that came back to you. There's 2 of
To
them.
Ben and I.
Yeah.
These comments were in the survey. So there's 2 comments here. And I would note that, there's limited feedback that we received on the draft. My impression is that most of the ad hoc committee members, as you can see there, will comment on this on tonight, because we didn't receive too much feedback. And so within the survey instrument themselves, I think a lot of people test drove the survey. And so they just put in, answers to kind of see how the survey instrument worked. But not many people left feedback about the survey itself within that. I think they were holding that for today. So the pieces that there was feedback in the survey instrument itself is what's included here. So first is that, for the question about budget priorities, someone wrote, this page question should be cut. Now, the context for this is that when you go to that question in the survey, which I'll pull up in a second, it wasn't clear if this page means this comment page about the budget priorities, or if it means, because this is kind of a separate page in the instrument where you get to add comments or input other items into the budget priorities, or if they meant, whoever wrote this, that the budget priorities question itself, which was the previous question actually, not this open-ended comment section, was what should be cut. Then there was a question about using this, that there was a typo. And I went back and I haven't found the typo yet, but maybe as we go through the survey momentarily, we can see what that typo might have been. Scott Endel had written in about the question about the budget, and perhaps what is the issue with sharing budget items, and in this inflationary environment, I think that's an important concern. But I think the other way to look at the question about budget priorities is to see it as kind of points, right? To get a sense for points that on a scale of 780,000, how would you prioritize spending these points? And in a sense, from a marketing science standpoint, when you ask questions in a survey, it's good to have the same kind of question asked different ways, because that's just something that happens in survey taking. It's helpful to have people kind of go back and kind of have an answer to a question in a different way. And in some ways, this budget question makes people reassess the priorities that they answered earlier in the survey by putting forth ideas about the points or budget, and actually their own dollars, and in a direct democracy kind of mindset. So and I know, Sue, you've mentioned several times this issue of renders, and I would urge the committee members to go back and look at what our neighborhood gave to the city in the first place. When the city decided that you would need to form this ad hoc committee, and it didn't move forward at that plan commission, the kind of the vision that we were told as a neighborhood that we could kind of put forth for the plan commission to work off of for the neighborhood, we had a very rough sketch for the neighborhood. And so some of the renders that you see in the survey are just, putting the best foot forward for the survey, and just kind of refreshing those graphics to something that we would like to have our best foot put forward with our with what we present. right? So Garrett had written back that when we first gave the city our neighborhood and vision for the survey, we had proposed a toddler track for that toddler park.
But
A lot of people were excited
Sachin,
about
we
that
haven't
idea.
had a survey yet. We're working on the
Sorry?
survey. We haven't had any survey yet. We're going to talk about survey questions shortly, I hope.
We are, yes.
Okay,
as
so-
you did your overview, Sue, before you got to your agenda items, I'm doing my overview also. So, right, so Garrett had talked about, didn't our neighborhood propose a toddler track for the toddler park? And so I wanted to include that for context too, that graphic and render. So the other thing in light of these open records issues that Misty Dodge had talked about and how all this is open for someone to see anyways, someone has taken my screen share off. So let me put that back on.
Please don't.
Who is that? Isn't this open records?
This is Scott.
So there's actually city communications that pursuant to this survey, pursuant to my role in the city, that included city members, and you're withholding that from being shared in this committee?
The emails that are there are the same as those that were mentioned when you were talking about the minutes. Do I have that right, Sachin?
No, that's part of it. That's part of it.
All right.
And,
Well, that is
yeah.
nothing in the emails. The emails talk about the fact that there's uncertainty about which exact neighborhoods will receive the survey. And
Yes.
we've already discussed that. And the mayor has asked that we not belabor it, and he is handling it. So
That's okay. I think the emails also point to the idea of why the survey didn't happen on the timeline that the committee agreed to, and that's germane for this discussion, and is feedback that you wrote in about the survey itself and who's to be receiving the survey. So I think it is germane, and I think it should stand. And I hereby object vociferously to the idea that you are withholding this information from the public, much like you withheld the survey draft up until now.
excuse me that I withheld a survey draft?
Yes, right.
I haven't.
All the stuff that should be in the agenda packet has not been shared. The survey, the background context, none of that is in the agenda packet. So it was not shared by the city.
Okay, so are you going to screen share that now as we move on to the, having the feedback from the committee to go point by point through the context document?
Should we take a vote on whether I should be able to share the emails that have gone through about the neighborhoods involved in the survey effort and the dates of those, and as they relate to completing or not completing the survey on time?
These are discussion items, so if we can move along to talk about first the context document that you said you would screen share, and everyone has the link to it as well at home, because we have a lot to get through, and we want to, by the end of the day, say that we have gotten solid feedback from everybody who'd like to provide it for each of the components of the survey.
Yes, well, unfortunately, Sue, with the city's governance process here, my screen sharing has been disabled by city staff. So I'm not able to do that at this juncture.
I think I'm going to take that as an indication that at the mayor's request, we are to move in the direction of reviewing the survey. I'm going to ask the mayor to come back with interpretation on that after this meeting. Staff, are you fine with that?
I've been given the go ahead to share now, I guess with the understanding that I'm not to share the document here. But again, I just would point out, given the lengthy introduction made by Misty Dodge about how all of this that we're doing on the behalf of the public is open and should be open to scrutiny, that will be made available at some point to people who would like to see that. So onto the survey itself. Part of the survey, yes.
Yeah, this is Garrett. So I just wanted to go back to my comment about the toddler track and that stuff. So I don't know if Sue, if you were aware of a meeting that wasn't like a formal meeting. It was just the neighborhood, some folks from the neighborhood and Scott, we talked through the park stuff last fall. And that's kind of what initiated this whole process. At that point, it was just the Stoner Prairie Park neighborhood. And then Sachin had put together kind of a document, a summary document, basically with all of our thoughts. And that's where that, toddler park thing came from. So even though it wasn't a formal survey, it was a survey of the neighborhood. And at that point, we thought that this process was going to be different. But anyway, so there was kind of an informal survey that already contained some information. I believe that's why we wanted to include that in this background information in the renderings. So I just wanted to provide that context.
Yes, thank you. Those renderings came to the Parks Commission in October of 2020. And at that meeting, the Parks Commission voted to have Janelle lead the group. And then became one of two iterations, the second in November, of which neighborhoods would participate. But here we are now with the group we have. And so the survey, or the informal survey that you created, is information that's important. And as each of you, as individuals now, when you go forward and fill out the survey, you can state preferences. However, one of the commissioners in October had stated that planning, also from a planning perspective, this is a person who's an architect and it relates somewhat, you also look at the process and the parcel as a blank slate and not necessarily be linked into where things are now. I mean, you could move a baseball backstop if you wanted to, but if it's not necessary, you don't. If there's a better place to put other things, you go ahead and do it. And so that's what was decided at the Parks Commission when we talked about it in October and November of 2020.
Okay, yeah, so basically it's all a blank slate and things can get moved wherever it makes sense, right?
Yes, and when the survey answers are compiled, then we have two other commission members, Parks Commission's members, who are on this committee as well, that I've introduced a few times. They will be creating renderings at that time to reflect try to reflect maybe even more than one version of what all the neighborhood respondents said. So there is if somebody looks at the survey and sees renderings that were created last fall before we ever met as a group, a lot of survey respondents in a hurry might think that it's already designed, and that's what they're going to keep in their mind as they answer questions. So that will be a problem.
Okay.
Well,
yeah,
I would point out that it's not a blank slate, and our document that we put together was a reiteration of a document that presented to us by Parks that showed where the shelter was, it showed where the new playground would be, it showed where the toddler playground is, and it showed where MOFA plays its ultimate frisbee. And that's frankly what's there. And a lot of the discussion to date has been about giving people some context. Furthermore, I invited Christina and Katie McDonald to be co-chairs of this committee. I invited them to be members of the subcommittee to help draft this survey also, and they declined. So I think providing context to users is something that many people gave as part of the feedback for developing the survey instrument, and that's what's there. So let me go through the survey here, and many of you are ad hoc committee members, so you've probably seen this again already, since most people took a test drive of it. But the first page is an introduction. So I don't know if anyone has. We can just take it section by section. If anyone has any comments here on the wording, phrasing. I think we have to realize this is a big committee, and so choices in exactly how something is phrased or worded may vary. And what we're trying to do really is to make sure there's no big gaps or a majority opinion that something should be removed or massaged in a certain way. We won't get to, complete consensus on whether we use an Oxford comma or not. And Ben is here too, and of course I invite Ben, who's also on the subcommittee with me, to add any context or that you'd like to start with too, Ben.
Yeah, and my apologies for I've been traveling a little bit. Can you guys hear me okay?
You're good, Ben.
Okay.
You're good.
Yeah, so I've been listening in and kind of dropping call here as we've gone along, and it's been quite a ride. So what I want to say here though is we all kind of have the same goal here, and we're dealing with something that's sort of like there was sort of a plan in place at one point, and now we're dealing with kind of like half of us starting from scratch and half of us not. And we need to just kind of come together on this and say like, okay, realizing that, how can we sort of come up with the best ideas from the collective group of our neighbors? And so Sachin and I spent a lot of time going through this. Part of this is based on some other community surveys of parks that have happened in the past. Some of this is based on some input from all of us. And then we tried to sort of address this anonymity question, which there may be some things that have to be handled by the city. We heard some things tonight about the open record stuff and stuff like that. So we need to be careful about all that and make sure that everyone's opinions are noted there. But really what we're trying to get at here is like, what do we want to see as a community in this park? And, do we want this to be something that it draws a certain demographic? Is it something that checks all the boxes or as many boxes as we can? The platform that it's in, the format that it's in, is a little bit limiting. We went through a couple of different survey platforms that seem to have, there's nothing that's perfect, and we're certainly not going to build something from the ground up. So we thought that this was one of the better survey platforms, and this is actually kind of like a beta version of a new SurveyMonkey platform that's sort of coming out as we're talking about this. And so there have been some points made along the way. Lucas made some great points yesterday or this morning regarding some of the scales and things, and hopefully we can adjust and accommodate some of those things. But really, what I would like to talk about is sort of like, what are the questions that we want on here that we're either missing or we ought not to be capturing? And then what are the things that we think that maybe we don't want to talk about, or that are sort of part of the foregone conclusions that we've talked about over the last hour or two. So that's kind of what we're hoping for. Hearing a little bit about kind of the open records conversation today, I'm a little bit challenged by what the right approach to it is, because from a feedback side, I guess I'm used to working in a world where people can say, hey, could you change this? And then we sort of change that and sort of adapt it along the way. And maybe we're operating outside of that. So we have to be mindful of that. But, ultimately we're working on this timeline, and we're trying to get this to be something that we can maybe talk about in 4 weeks and be able to say, all right, this is sort of the direction we want to go with this structure. And there's going to be some budget items that drive the conversation. So, that's kind of where this started. And as far as what was shared just a few minutes ago about some of the feedback side, some of that stuff, I'm not exactly sure how, as a committee, we're going to work through some of those conversations about feedback. So I'm maybe looking for a little direction on that. But as we look at, yeah, go ahead, Janelle.
Sorry about stepping on you there. So my advice would be a conversation with Sonia. She's a city planner. And so, for example, as we went through our processes crafting a 30-year plan for the city, she needed to go through some of these same considerations, the open records, what could we ask, what couldn't we ask? And so she might be a great resource, and because she's just done a tremendous amount in the survey space. So that might be somebody that we can pull in for some best practices.
I think the city has already kind of weighed in on this a bit, right? So we know that we can be choosing the platform that works best. And procedurally right now, how the survey is set up is, to save city staff time and make it easy on them, the survey subcommittee has built this survey, and this platform allows us a simple export. And when we have made these edits tonight to get the survey in the shape that we want it to be before it goes out, then this survey instrument will be given to and transferred to the city account, which Chad will administer. And then there is a question on last name, one per household. There is a question on street address and selecting a neighborhood. But the idea so far, as it's drafted, is that those would be just checked for duplicates, because I think there's some concerns around that. But otherwise, when the feedback is given to us as a committee, Chad or other city staff, maybe in IT, will make sure that personally identifiable information is removed. Now, the conversation Misty talked about is maybe that's not the direction we want to go, because maybe what we're supposed to do is just like if someone registered to speak publicly here tonight, to have feedback on this park process, to give input on anything, they would register and share their name, share their address. That's what we did for the Zoom call. So maybe that is the way to go, and everyone's information is, and then we solve that issue of having the city working on the back end, dealing with open records requests of people saying, who filled this out and who was their answer. So, that is, I think, part of this feedback that we have to address. But the city has weighed in a sense of what we can, which platform we can use, and the idea of running the survey. People have weighed in on that. So from that standpoint, we're good to go. So, again, a lot of the discussion, the feedback was about providing context. And so I can move on. So one of the first things we have here is a context document to be shared so that people can be best informed. Not everyone has read all these agenda packets. Not everyone has been tuning in to these meetings that we're having monthly. And so I think people should be informed as before taking the survey. And I know in my conversations talking to about people at the park periphery, in our backyard, they're looking for this context. They'd like to know this so they can join the conversation. So let me pull out now the context document, which you all reviewed.
Hey, Sachin, while you're doing that, I think, part of that context document is critical, especially for including things for park usage. I know we talked a lot about the ultimate Frisbee groups that use it. Last year was kind of a blown year for everything, ultimate Frisbee included. So people might not really know, what the regular usage of that park would be. So I think, including hours, days, weekends, number of participants, things like that. So people understand, traffic concerns, shelter usage concerns potentially, all that kind of stuff. I think for, maybe for the people that don't live in the neighborhood, that the context isn't that important because maybe they're just driving here or, biking here to use it for what they want. But for our neighborhood and the Crescent Crossing, I think it's absolutely critical to have as much information as possible.
Thank you. So many people talked about, wanting to calibrate off of a budget. Ben, would you like to say something? You look like you're about to say something, Ben.
No, yeah. So I know that Scott had some input, and you were sharing some of those comments back earlier about sharing budget numbers, and we know we're in super volatile times for building costs and things, and certainly this whole project could be derailed when we find out that a $200,000 shelter is now $1.2 million. But I think we have to kind of go down that road and at least prioritize what we're planning for this space. And part of that is we had kind of talked through, do we put sort of, people don't know what things cost, right? So if I say, I want a basketball court and I want a small golf course, and I want, you could like add these list of want items, and all of a sudden, like nobody really knows what these things cost. I feel like we sort of end up back at the starting gate. And so we had talked about maybe either assigning a dollar value or potentially just assigning like a 1 to 10 score of a cost for that specific item. So let's just say like a redoing the baseball field would be like a 9 or a 10 or something, or we weren't exactly sure how to score that, but that was something else that we talked about outside of having true dollar figures tied to it. But at the same point, ending up at somehow getting some scale that would sort of include each of those components of the park. And so I'm not exactly sure what you'd want beyond that, but that was part of our conversation. So
Yeah,
Said.
yeah,
So it sounds like you could list various items and then almost like a restaurant guide where it talks about how expensive it is to go to that particular restaurant. They'll have $5 signs, $4 signs, $3 signs.
sure. Yeah.
Just assign a relative value one to the other with context, just to say, we don't know what anything's going to cost.
Right. So one of the challenges that we had is based on the scoring system, what that prioritization means. I know we're not to that point of the survey yet, but it all comes as to part of that budget conversation. And when I look at a list of 50 items, and that list is quite large, and we've really tried to pare that down to be something a little bit more compact. We were both looking at it saying like, well, so we have this option of improving the toddler park, and then we have this option of redoing the toddler park, and those should have different kind of budgetary consequences. And so we should not assign them as a one-to-one comparison. And that was what we were trying to say. How can we best do that in a survey? And you'll kind of see some of those things, but they aren't the same. And if somebody said, well, my priority would be to redo the toddler park, and my priority would be to start the toddler park from new because I have toddlers and I want the best toddler lot I've ever seen. Now we have sort of a duplicity there. And so we were thinking that sort of maybe either budget scoring or point scoring would be the best way to sort of sort that out and at least give us sort of a broader community either support or not support based on those different projects.
I have a question when I can about was there ever the discussion of the option of the toddler park might be relocated?
well, this is just a concept. I mean, people are open to, yeah.
Well, right. I was asking it, and I also apologize. I'm putting two things together, but there were questions further on about two options for toddler park, and that's where I get back to the blank slate concept of we might end up with designs that show a toddler park elsewhere, closer to the restrooms or something like that. So I wanted to just make sure we're not leading people to know that there's only two options when there may be four.
Right.
But two options are better than zero. Showing them two options are better than zero. And back to Ben's point about the budget though, and the point scoring versus the budget dollars, I think saying a shelter that's 200,000 is now 1.2 million is an order of magnitude off. And so I think rather we should think about it as, these are estimates that were given to us largely by the city and using, historical numbers by this city or other cities nearby. And yes, we can account for inflation. But the other point of it is people have been raising questions about already at this meeting, writing grants or, fundraising, creating a Friends of Stoner Prairie or Friends of the Fitchburg Parks. How do we know what our needs are if people don't know how much things cost? And so especially when it comes around the big ticket item, the shelter, I think having a graduated dollar amount that shows, well, it could be this, it could be that, and it could be off by a margin, but we know generally, I think, where the cost should be. And that's good enough for getting people to weigh in on their priorities. and budget priorities.
So
Yeah,
my
ask-
suggestion would be that we go ahead and add some language here that we are putting dollars in for benchmarking purposes, and that given the volatility, of the construction cost, that these numbers should be considered very rough estimates. And I think that that will help people understand that we're trying to give them some sense of this. But I think most of the world is pretty aware of what's going on in the construction business. And that will give us permission to have some latitude here.
Yeah, and I think
You know, when people actually take the survey, you'll see that there's a disclaimer there in the budget priorities question. So that's included to a degree, but I agree that we should put it up front here as well. Sorry, Garrett.
Oh, that's okay. So one other thing about the budget too, I think it was since last meeting, I've learned, and I think it was Scott or Chad that emailed that there's still some monies that aren't accounted for. And that's the phase 3 of the William Ryan development, which is, I tried to count, it's about 40 houses. So if we look at that and the amount that, each house is paid, which is, at least, from my calculations, close to, $5,000, that's an extra 200,000 that's going to be in the budget. So I think we should clarify that as soon as possible as well.
Janelle spoke to the breakout in the last meeting. Janelle, is there anything you can say about that?
That didn't include phase 3 though, which is like just breaking ground right now.
I think Janelle, when you had heard back from the city, they said that would be released when the building permits is actually given, and so we can't really count for it, right? But we can, and again, that may be there, it may not be there. Let's go forward at this point with what we know, and if we're over and that money comes forward, then great. We don't have to do fundraising, or we don't have to cut something out. That's the point I would take it. The city's not willing to, share with us that number yet officially because it's not known, and they feel like they can't comment on that publicly yet. Let's realize that that's potentially there, but not document that here since they're not willing to document it.
Okay, no, I think that's a good point. Then we can just use that as buffer for increased costs, things like that.
Can I ask on that budget page, rather than having people assign dollar values to kind of priority, which I think is going to be a bit of a complicated ask, especially kind of getting them to assign it to the, if we left the existing budget and we left the scale, the individual line items, or said this would account likely for 25% of our budget or something like that, could we have people drag those and kind of reorder them in order of priority so that you're not asking them necessarily to say, I would spend $10,000 on this, but you're leaving the weighted element there for them to see, but allowing them to say, I'm going to drag my top 10 priorities, or I'm going to rank them in order of, with some acknowledgement that I would never want to put 5 $200,000 things up there because it's way over budget. I worry about the assigning values thing, that it's going to be a steep ask, I think, for kind of
I think
a layperson to fill.
I think the challenge that we had with that is that some people have like first of all, it's a long list, and I was overwhelmed with the list when we first assembled it based on looking at different documents. And then secondly, from a prioritization side, as I said before, I may say that I want a half basketball court, but I also want a full basketball court. And so from a priority side, I want both of those. And how do I put that in some sort of form, right? And so we were kind of like, well, maybe the ask needs to be, I'm interested in a basketball court, and I would like this amount of money sort of going towards that. And that's why there's sort of two levels to those questions, where it's like the first one is like on that 1 to 5, how high of a priority is this? And then how much of a budget would you put towards that? And I think the thought was that we would sort of do like a weighted balance of the responses. So let's just say for, I'm just thinking of some numbers. Let's just say for the shelter, just because it's a big number. Let's say that our weighted average for that was closer to the kind of higher priced item. Then that would sort of direct the committee to say, hey, maybe we need to focus more money towards the higher end of that decision. than towards the lower end. But I'm totally with you, Josh. I mean, if this were a simpler, more simplified list, I would, that would be an ideal way to do it, right? Where you're sort of prioritizing it. And Lucas brought up a good point too about sort of like what are the amenities that are there now that we haven't talked about. And so maybe there's an opportunity for us to revise that list to be more like, how do you prioritize yourself among the amenities now versus the potential amenities? So that was something that we talked about. So I really do appreciate the feedback coming back, at least getting some ideas on those questions.
Yeah, are people comfortable with me moving to the next slide?
I'm good.
Yes.
Okay. So this has been in the agenda packet for the background for us in the ad hoc committee meeting, but giving people the neighborhood radius. So you've all seen that. I assume we can move forward. This is where we discuss the context of the opportunity, in a sense, to co-locate a shelter with the well, and the idea that then it is subsidized by the city engineering. And we also give a little bit of coverage about the reciprocity available with Verona, the use of the South recreational fields, and then we move on to the overall park context images.
One small question. So in point number 2, where we talk about how the city engineering is paying for the other half, is it a percentage that they're paying, or is it a specific dollar that they're contributing towards?
Well, I based off of the, you see that it says medium-sized shelter. So we kind of have the small shelter and we have the medium size, which would be like the Hugo Jamestown. We have the word medium there because that's how it kind of broke out when city did the I always say that one wrong. Hugo Jamestown, right? Hugo Jamestown shelter. So that was for the medium size, but otherwise, you know, for the smaller shelter, it would be different proportion.
Yeah, and so what I'm just not certain of is when we're taking a look at the shelter project, point number 2, where it starts out as the intermediate shelter, etc. I am not certain if we are splitting that up on percentages, or if in fact Public Works has, for example, earmarked $200,000 towards this project, and I'm making those numbers up. And so anything above the 200,000 is what we would need to contribute towards. So we need some clarification on that point. My assumption is that it's in fact a fixed amount that they've probably got budgeted for the pump station and the associated housing. And so anything that we did, you know, again, assuming that their contribution and their budget is 200,000, that anything above that $200,000 would come out of this particular project.
And I have a follow-up question that came to me just thinking about this the last day or two along those same lines. And Scott may know, or we may have to find, I believe in Hugo Jamestown, it ended up being a roughly, the park, the municipality paid roughly half of what you see there. But one of the questions I have is, are we absolutely certain, because that's a combined park with City of Madison, what did City of Madison pay that we are maybe not working into our equation? And since we don't know, I'd like to throw out a suggestion for when we talk about that very first paragraph of paring it down so it doesn't quite sound like what that we're promising into the future what we think occurred in the past. And I appreciate why it's there, and I would have done the same thing until starting to think about this more. We don't know the construction costs. We don't know if City of Madison, we don't know if some of that shelter, and Scott, you may know, was Healthy Neighborhood Grant money, any part of that shelter at Hugo Jamestown? If you're still there?
I've been going off of the, the estimates kind of given to us by the city so far about these costs. I mean,
Right, and I appreciate that.
we
I
went
would
from
have done this.
520,000 for Hugel Jamestown to I think like 750,000 now, thinking ahead to the ideas of inflation and
Yeah.
the cost changes
And I
since
would have
then.
done the
So
very same
certainly.
thing. I'm agreeing that that's appropriate, except for we don't know. It's just some additional questions. So I guess before this goes to print and is sent out, it might just be easier to say anyway, because the other unknown we can never figure out until we get bids that come back in the future is that a portion will be covered by the Public Works engineering budget to bring water and whatever it takes to service the building. And that our project, however big or small, tacks onto that. And I think it absolves us of going down a path I didn't even think about until a day or two ago.
Any comments from the city staff on that?
Yeah, I might offer that. I think that the general idea is that the water department are planning on that well, and they would have some associated costs with that. Anything in addition to the needs of the well and that group would be the cost that this project would bear. And I think the benefit comes in that the well, in order to have the well, there needs to be city water, water access. So I think that would be where the savings would be if we would do it independent shelter and bathroom. The cost of the project would have to be incurred in bringing that water to that facility. So there would be a savings in that for the well project, they need to bring the water to the well per se. So that would be the savings. But anything outside of the well construction that we would like to have included in the project, a lean-to shelter or whatever it might be, would be bore by the funds from the parks.
Scott, do we have a mechanism to reach back to Public Works and understand what they have specifically identified as their budget / contribution to this?
They don't have, there isn't a contribution. Well, I could double check, but there isn't a contribution from the Public Works and the well to providing a shelter or bathrooms or anything like that to the park.
And my apologies, what I meant to say is, do we know what their budget is on this project?
I think I can find that out.
Okay.
I mean, they're waiting to hear from us about a shelter size or amenity after our survey's complete to configure their plans and put it out to bid. But they probably have a ballpark, maybe they do, I shouldn't promise for them, of what they might get back as a bid, and they're gonna, in a way, probably scratch their heads and say, we don't for sure know either because costs are going out of control.
Yeah, so typically what will happen with these things, from a budget perspective, is that they'll put together some numbers. Those numbers would maybe be part of last year's budgeting process. And so those numbers would have been approved by Common Council as part of some of the strategic initiatives for example, 2021. Then they're going to go out and go to bid for detailed specifications. In a normal marketplace, they've been pretty accurate. I would say within about 8 to 10% that those budget numbers have been in line with what we've seen for the bids that have come back. But this is clearly an unusual time for many reasons, not the least of which is that budget of construction it truly is dynamic daily. And so what we would have anticipated for budget and been close to it's throwing a dart at a board right now. And so I think my hope is that we can at least get a sense of where their number was. It's not going to tell us for sure what things are going to end up looking like. It's only going to tell us as a small point of order that we might change up and say, if included, $375,000 of the park's budget, parentheses, $200,000 coming from civil engineering. And so folks, so that we're just, it's just a little housekeeping thing in our language.
Noted, and perhaps we can, share with them what we're struggling with in terms of how we're phrasing this, and they will be able to give us some input on those numbers to share and around the budget parameters. Any other comments on this page? Okay. Just amenities and definitions that are common at different park sizes for Fitchburg park definitions, the city of Fitchburg. So again, these renderings you see on the next few pages are basically revisions of what we shared as a neighborhood with the city last fall and was presented by Parks to the Park Commission, just zhuzhed up a little bit because why not, if you're going to share this broader, to have it, people, have a sense for scale, have a sense for uses. And again, they also match what the city presented to our neighborhood at our meeting. And at that time, I think that maybe the idea for the process here was that, we give a wish list of items and then it'd go to the Park Commission and they'd work from there. And so that's what we did. And now that it's a broader process, we put a little more refinement to the same images.
I have a question about that. A comment you made, and you've said it twice at least, what the city gave to you. Are you referring, because this looks very similar, and what we saw at Parks Commission in October of 20 was very similar. So the document you're referring to was the 1996 Stoner Prairie plan that was done?
No, it was a document that Scott shared with us on site when we assembled our neighborhood to kind of talk about the park and the park planning process. Mm-hmm. I think it's exhibited in one of these agenda packets. It shows the shelter location, which again coincides with the well.
Okay. It was
it shows the toddler park, it shows the playground equipment, it shows the ball diamond.
Right.
So that's what we started with,
Okay.
not a blank slate.
All right.
And then we put a wish list of items together, and
Okay.
and that's what we presented back to the city in last fall.
Okay,
and
so I'll pass along then now that in October at the Parks Commission meeting, the Parks Commissioners wanted a process that followed more along the lines of what we're doing now. And I appreciate very much that neighbors met. In this interim, the Stoner Prairie neighborhood itself has grown. And this will also be shown to other neighborhoods who will answer the survey. So it is misleading to show these because these weren't approved by the Parks Commission. The Parks Commission did not say, these are drawings that we want used in a survey. It was, we are going to start from scratch, and Janelle is leading the process. Now, that's not where we are now, but that is what the upshot of that meeting was. So each time we see a slide as we go along here of renderings that were only looked at or conceived by a small group, it's not appropriate to put those in this new survey for the entire group.
Hey, Sue. So I guess that, so what changed from fall until now? Because I think, me and a few others in the neighborhood are kind of confused about the process. And initially, we thought it was just going to be the Stoner Prairie neighborhood and Crescent Crossing doing this because it was 100% paid for by the developers of our neighborhoods.
had our first meeting, Janelle provided all the numbers and then pointed out, like, for example, where there is a tot lot right now, that's part of the park, it's real estate of value, so it's something that exists that belongs to the other neighborhoods that were developed prior, like Lazy Heights.
Yeah, Lacy Heights, correct.
And then the large area where we talk about where MUFA exists, that's been within the city system for a long time too. So Janelle can probably speak better to specific dollars. And then, but the final point is also that our comprehensive plan for the city of Fitchburg for planning parks talks about including input from the neighbors within a half a mile. And so that's where it broadens out to other neighborhoods. And so that's just more of what the process is to be. And so that's why it changed from your initial meetings of your input
So did the
where we are
process
now.
change, or did, like, what? I guess I don't understand.
Yeah, let me add a little color to that.
Yeah.
So really, when this initially came forward and I was an alder, I could see the William Ryan's neighborhood coming in. I saw on the horizon the Crescent Crossing neighborhood coming in. The William Ryan was providing a contribution of land that was tangential to the existing properties. The dollars from William Ryan per se were not significant, but the fact that there was land that was associated actually made it a nicer connected green space. So that was one piece. Where Crescent Crossing lacked in land, they made up for it in dollars. And so they were the larger financial contributor to this. The third piece of this was, of course, what we just finished conversation around, which was the Public Works project. And so in my mind, I'm looking and saying, well, if we've got a Public Works project that's bringing water into the location, and we can piggyback on that project, we could theoretically do a shelter for approximately 1/2 of what it would otherwise cost us, because we'd have to incur all of the infrastructure costs associated with the civil engineering piece. And so I'm looking and saying, it would be great if we could piggyback on that project, which would bring us running water, and therefore bring us bathrooms and fountains and all sorts of resources that otherwise would be outside of our reach. So you look at that piece and say, well, all right, again, if each of these budgets was dealt with by their respective either neighborhoods or developers, we would have two things. We would have some duplicity in those efforts, but secondly, we wouldn't have nearly the opportunity if we combine all of those resources into one major initiative. And so I had a conversation with Scott around that. I had a conversation with the mayor around that. They both agreed with the concept. At that point in time, I put together probably about a 3-page document that went on to talk about this vision from an executive perspective. It went on and identified some smaller dots we could connect, like bringing in a short connection into the Badger State Trails, making sure that we didn't duplicate resources that maybe we already had over at the Seminole Glen Park, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we were really able to do then is say, how do we not duplicate? How do we connect dots, whether it's dollars, whether it's existing infrastructure, and ultimately make something that is interesting and innovative by those collective efforts. So the suggestion was that the first phase was to reach out to the respective neighborhoods based on the fact that this was kind of the more medium range park. And so we needed to reach out to the neighbors within that geographic disbursement, get their feedback, and then we would be specifically looking for a sense of the personas. So how many people had little kids that were interested in, a sandbox, things of that nature? How many people rode bikes? How many people were walkers, winter sports. There were a handful of different potential uses. And it was kind of saying, okay, what are your priorities collectively so that we could bring that data together and start seeing trends and start seeing the majority. And the next step beyond that would have been crafting a budget that would have gone back to each of those respective areas. And so just excuse the term, you go to the mamas and say, what do we want to add to that little kid park, right? To the people that ride bikes, where would you like to see investments made for maybe a bike rack or a repair station, et cetera? And so we were following the lead of the majority of the people in the area that would be using that park. And so that then would lead us to, and we had some other pieces in there considering.
So, I mean, I think can I just interject here, just for the interest of time? I mean, the short answer is the process did change, correct?
I don't.
Yes, the process changed from what was intimated to our neighborhood initially.
This is where I think we've got the crux of the conflict is one group was under the impression that we were starting really from a blank slate, surveying and then going through a process that way. The other group was under the impression that they had already put that effort in, and we had something that was, let's say, at least half-baked from a plan. And
well, I mean, to that point, you know, at the end of this, you know, Misty clarified for us what this process is going to ultimately result in. It's going to be a wish list of items that will go to the Parks Commission. So, you know, at the end of this, in a sense, anything we produce will be half-baked because ultimately it will go to the Parks Commission. And Misty clarified for us that ultimately that's who will decide what happens, right? Hopefully with the input. So, you know, it was a new process and the process changed. And as far as I've been told, this has never been done before. So I think, you know, the short answer is that there's a new process, a different process.
You know, the one thing that I think that we've differed on is that my original direction on this was that we were going to be asking the neighbors first in a very open way, in a very general way, what their interests were, and then we were going to start working through a process of budget, assets, etc. So, and then on the back end of this, we will still need to go back to each of those collective neighborhoods through all 4 or 5 neighborhoods that are impacted and get their buy-in. And that will be probably the third to last step, is get the neighborhood's feedback. And so the theory was that if we went first with the survey and then came back at the end, that they should be consistent because we went in an open way, gathered questions, got feedback. So this should look like what they asked us for. Then it goes to Parks and then it goes to Common Council.
Will all the stakeholders, all the neighborhoods feedback be weighted the same?
Yes.
Okay. Is that the correct way to do it, considering some of the other neighborhoods have neighborhood parks already? So they might not want duplicate resources at our park if they're right next to their park that has it, for example.
Yeah.
And considering the funds for this is coming from, you know, the neighborhood, essentially each of us has paid, you know, $5,000 through our house for this park.
And I think initially one of the conversations was to leave it as it was, right? You know, my argument back was that if we left any of the subdivisions within exclusively their own budget, that they would see significantly less out of their park than if we combined resources.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to combine resources, but if I'm right next to a park that has a tennis court and I'm responding to a survey of a park that's half a mile away, well, I don't want a tennis court there. I've got one right next to me. So I just feel like there's different considerations for people that have neighborhood parks versus, because this will be our neighborhood park essentially. Like, you know, we shouldn't have to, or have our kids walk a half mile or you know, ride bike a half mile to do playground equipment because some other neighborhoods that have it right there don't want it in our park. So I hope people understand kind of where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah, Garrett, I think super important points, well taken. And one of the things that I think that Janelle didn't kind of hint at, and maybe there's some confusion, is that I can't remember the exact number of acres that the park is currently, but what happens when if you were to have sort of your own park, and let's just say, I don't remember the number, what you said, Janelle, let's say $200,000, $240,000. Something comes to be similar to what the tot lot is for Lacey Heights Park right now. And so that collective idea and opportunity really did sort of increase the budget for this park, but it also increased it from a neighborhood park to an area park, which does change sort of that influence from a neighborhood side. And unlike sort of the Terra Vesa on the east side of town, where, you know, that control is all within the developer, unfortunately, the developer of North Stoner Prairie didn't say, this is the park that I'm going to build when I build these houses. He decided, or they decided instead to just pay a dollar in and left us to kind of deal with it. And what that presents a good opportunity for us, it also presents what we're dealing with tonight, rather than it being in one hand, it's in many hands. So, you know, at the end of the day, the survey, the idea behind the survey is, the survey is not telling us, we're not going to say, oh, whatever the number one thing is, that's the 100% thing that we're going to do. It's going to give the direction to the committee for us to then say, let's prioritize a couple of these things. Does it make sense if, oh, we don't want to prioritize improving the tot lot area? Is that coming because of whatever reasons? It doesn't limit us from making those changes along the way. So I don't share a lot of concern along that. I think we're going to end up with something that's really cool. And I think it's going to be something that is agreeable to everybody. I just think we're kind of dealing with like a little bit of a frustrating time right now to say, like, how come I don't have control over this? Or, you know, I just think we need to get this thing done and then review what the results are and then talk about it. It's not going to be the final say in where we end up with this. Just like this sort of plan from the start isn't going to be a final say. It's all going to be half-baked until we end up getting some final dollar numbers anyway, which could very well change the entire plan as it stands anyway, based on budget numbers. So, yeah, I'm with you though on some of those concerns.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, you know, voice the neighborhood concerns because, you know, they feel like we're potentially underrepresented in this whole deal with.
And I don't think
everybody else.
and just to clarify, Garrett, I'm not sure that the numbers exactly match up to what you're saying. I'm not dismissing that. I'm just saying the Crescent Crossing component of it really did bring a lot of dollars to this. So
yeah, they were like 500 and some. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's 118 or 120 units in the North Stoner Prairie neighborhood.
Yeah, there's about
there may be some more funds for us.
Yeah, a little under 100 right now. And I think we put in like 200,000 with phases 1 and 2.
Yeah, and the other point to remember is that existing land has value, and the parcels that existed as parkland while the rest of this was cornfield remains larger than the parcel that was added after new development came in. So everybody's made a contribution over time, and that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, we should have bought that cornfield on the corner for that public works, 10 years ago.
Exactly. Right.
Okay, so circling back, I think the last point of departure was Sue's comment about the inclusion of these images. And, if you look back at the agenda packets, all along, there's been versions of images that are very similar to this, and these are just updated. So I don't really see a problem with their inclusion. They're here, they're ready. And the survey subcommittee was asked to put a survey together, and this is a refined version of images that have been in pretty much every agenda packet.
Are there
So-
any questions that are asked specifically about those, or that we're still in just the context pages, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so there will be nobody asking, do you like what you see here?
Because we don't want to, I mean, this is a concept that
Right.
just shows
Correct.
a possible layout.
Well, and that's
So-
where, this is where the problem comes in, because there are probably 100 possible layouts. And I object to showing layouts at all. There should be contours of the park showing what exists there right now, period. Because anything else is for the person quickly going through a survey, going to taint or sway them to think, and in a real hurry, someone will say, well, I guess they designed that and they show this here, that must be the design. The design, images come afterwards, after we get the input.
So Sue, at this point, you're saying we should be giving no information. We're going to a restaurant. We shouldn't give prices, and we shouldn't tell what they're ordering.
No,
We're
you can,
just saying, do you want?
no, I'm not
the idea
saying
of
that.
food?
No,
That's what
I'm,
you're saying right now, because you're telling us we can't show pictures of what it might look like. We can't show what the space would be. You don't want us to be able to prioritize with dollars what the different things would cost, and people are not going to know what they're talking about. The purpose of this is to show what could be there without ever saying that we're committing to a specific layout, a specific location. It's saying trees cost $300. How many trees do you want? It's saying a shelter might cost this much money. How much do you want? It takes up this much space. That's important. I can't tell you how many trees would fit well on a 1 acre corner.
right, the forester does that with the landscape architect. So,
And yet we're supposed to be able to prioritize how many trees we want or what budget allocation we should put for trees. Nobody knows that without pictures and numbers.
well,
I think it's good that we've got dollars in here. I think it's good that we're looking at the types of users and their interest around that. Again, little kids versus people that walk, etc. My concern is that if we're providing images of the layout, that we are leading the conversation and we're leading people's decisions.
Can we include maybe like one MUFA field, for example, just for reference, maybe the pickleball or tennis courts and then a basketball court, just for some type of reference? Because like, walking over there, I have no idea what a MUFA field looks like how big they are. But seeing it in context here helps me, understand like where stuff could potentially go. And that's good information to have.
well, if we're putting in markers for what exists, you'd have the softball field. What does exist is the imagery of the 3 MUFA fields, 3.5 MUFA fields right now, but those are shifted. But that, and the other thing that exists is play equipment on that older parcel on Scarlet Drive.
But as far
That's
as
what
newer stuff
exists.
though, like giving examples of what that looks like and how that fits in the bigger picture. It's all providing
We
context
won't
of what we're
have
trying
the
to
answers
do.
to how many people want, I know pickleball's popular and it's probably gonna show up, but we would be showing amenities that we're not sure people really want. And we wanted them to tell us that without us showing them a picture of it first in a certain place where it looks like it's already going to be there. As
Well,
far
I
as
can,
dollars,
chime in
I
for
think
just
that they
one
made a good
second.
case for, other people have made a good case for keeping dollars in. I'm sorry, Christopher, you're on.
I was just going to say that from some personal experience I've had, not necessarily with projects at this scale, but of a similar scope, we do run a risk by showing people these images, even though we realize that that it is just an idea, but we do really risk people seeing this and then us providing recommendations for something different, and then part of the community feeling like there was a bait and switch scenario, that this is what we were promising, and then maybe we find out that something that looks like this really isn't what the community wants, and then, or at least a majority of the community, and then what we propose is different, that remaining portion of the community could feel like they were misled. So I do think that images like this are valuable for providing context and scale. It is putting the cart before the horse a bit, because this does look very much, you know, it's an attractive graphic and it's well rendered, and so that makes it look like it's more of a finished product, which is not at all where we are yet. We're still in the process of figuring out what we need to put here. So I do think showing an image like this might be getting ahead of ourselves and be a bit misleading, frankly. So
Should we include some of the MUFA fields at least? Because it seems like, you know,
Well,
those
sure.
are gonna be here regardless. At least that's kind of the impression I'm getting, since they, you know, that group already uses it, and it seems like they're, you know, that space is gonna be open anyway.
I
So if
think
it's
it's-
been decided something is gonna be somewhere, we should include it and not say it's blank and then
Well,
add stuff later.
those in a way are existing too. So I think it would be entirely appropriate to include an outline of a field or those fields on there, especially for scale. You know, people get a sense of how much space they take up, and I think that would certainly be appropriate.
So if I may tail on to that, so we kind of take a look and maybe show where the committed space is for civil engineering / proposed shelter. And then we kind of mark that other area, what I'm just gonna call Parks and Recreation, which includes Verona Area School District, City of Fitchburg Parks and Rec, MUFA. I mean, we've got multiple users of that space. And then we've got the little kids park. So folks kind of can stand there and in that space get a sense of what is already a committed decision, as it would be with the civil engineering project. Christopher, is that appropriate form?
Yeah, I think so. I think providing context for those types of things and how much space they take up is appropriate, but we just need to make sure that it doesn't look like it's been too designed already.
So I guess I'm confused again. So is there committed space for certain activities in certain parks aside from the toddler play area? Because it seems like we've gone back and forth a bit on, you know, it can be whatever the survey says and what we want it to be, but then we go back to, well, there's going to be committed space for certain things. So if we know there's going to be committed space for certain things, then that should be in there, right? Like,
So
am I
my
missing something?
my opinion on this is that we identify, for example, the Parks and Rec is existing use, and existing use, including Verona Area Schools, Fitchburg Park and Rec, MUFA, and I don't know that I'm per se, that my mind is certainly made up, and I certainly can't speak for my neighbors, but it would say this is what the existing utilization looks like, just like we've got with the little kids park. Even though we don't per se have existing utilization of the shelter, what we do know is that there is going to be a facility at that location. So I think identifying that is already a decision that's been made as well.
So the area by the baseball diamond is going to have the exact same use as it has today. That's already been decided. Is that?
I don't think that we've decided that.
Okay,
What-
well, I thought that's what you just
Garrett, I will answer that, and what I'm trying to say and have said is that the school system uses it as open field. And we have, now, let's say that ultimate frisbee falls out of favor and suddenly nobody wants to do it and they want pickleball. Well, then maybe in 50 years, all you'll see there is pickleball courts. Things change on a cycle, but MUFA seems like a great exercise for young people. I'm all for it. I love hearing people cheering when I'm in my yard in the summertime. So it's an open space that is available to the community and has been open to the community on that parcel for we moved here in 2004, and I don't know exactly how many years they've been there, but almost every summer, we hear them having fun out there, and it's great. So there'll be something there on an open field, because you can't pave over or convert the outfield to the ball diamond. And the school uses the ball diamond. So we've got that reciprocity. So from halfway down where it's open, it's gonna be open. I can't promise what will be there. Right now,
Okay, so-
though, it's fair to say the rendering is some Mufa fields, the ball diamond.
So it's gonna be open field, is what you're saying, that whole area.
As best as I can predict.
I
And
think in my opinion, for the survey, what we want to do is we just want to identify existing conditions, with the one exception, identifying where the shelter will be for the civil engineering project.
And then there's a tot lot, there's some equipment there
Well,
right now.
I mean, okay, so let's close this out. I will close it out by saying, one, our committee did convene, our neighborhood did convene and created a rendering, an image, and that's been included in all the previous, so whether that's, putting the cart before the horse, too, but that's been shared and it's available to everyone in previous agenda packets, right? These images of the existing, and then also what our neighborhood envisioned and passed along. So I think the question comes now, Chris, and it seems you had the point. You're saying this is too refined to share, and then we share the older versions.
I don't know that you should share any version other than existing conditions as an image. The list of ideas in the survey, and even I really liked your point about assigning dollar amounts as a way of asking the same question in a different way. I think that's really valuable. So I think those elements verbally and as an idea is good, but I would hesitate to show them graphically. But existing conditions would be important to visualize for people.
Except for the shelter.
Except for the shelter, right? I think that's a known item, and that should be shown like as future shelter location.
And because people, lay people may not understand the scale of what a half acre is on a double lot for parking, how many cars could fit, anything like that. So you're saying don't show any parking either, even though that's becoming a primary consideration and source of anxiety for our neighborhood.
That's a very good consideration.
Or
I would still hesitate to show it.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, I would still hesitate to show it, just in that it would be keeping with the theme of the image then, that you're showing only existing and known items, whereas that isn't officially a known item yet.
I think the thing that we know that is a known but future item is that a structure will be there in support of a civil engineering project. And even though we haven't committed to the shelter until we go through this survey, we do know that there will be some kind of a facility there to support the civil engineering project.
Okay, so the survey subcommittee will revise these images to comport with the idea of showing existing conditions plus the intended shelter location or well site anyways, because the shelter question hasn't been decided. So here's a little bit more on the costs for people to keep in mind. And these are figures that were in previous agenda packets, but again, the idea was that many respondents may not refer back to them, the agendas and agenda packets, so they were provided for their convenience here. Any comments or questions here?
In my opinion, I think this is helpful. I think it gives people some sense of what things cost. And so, you know, when you think about a shelter, I think most people would be surprised at the cost associated with a Hugel Jamestown shelter. That gets a nice home, right? So when we're talking about the budget that we've got and getting a sense that that shelter would cost us $533,000 gives people a sense of we've got what seems to be a generous budget until you start figuring out what things cost. So from my perspective, I think this is a good reference spot.
Yeah, to be clear, I think the, you know, the shelter here, this quote here, 533 is the full cost. And it hasn't taken out the, however, what you want to apportion the piece that engineering paid for with the shelter. So,
And I appreciate that. I think that we did call that detail out earlier in the document. They maybe didn't connect the dots per se, but we do have that addressed earlier in your deliverables.
any other questions, comments here?
Sachin, it's Mark. Just that I agree. I think any imaging we can include is helpful.
I have a question that came to me just now, looking at the paved path, because it's saying, and it's all ballpark anyway, but it says X number of dollars per linear foot, but we don't know how wide the path is. There's 8 foot, 10 foot, 12 foot. So whether or not you want to find out from Scott, because he,
This was the figure for, go ahead, Scott.
Yep, that's a linear foot at 10 foot wide.
thank you.
If I didn't
Okay,
say
so,
before, thank you for all the hard work that you put into this.
so now let me move on to the actual survey itself. If my window of being belonging to that app still lets me in. Okay. So now we're back to the first page of the survey. Any additional comments, questions here?
Small thing, and these are minor typos.
That's okay.
Lacey Height, neighborhood should be capitalized for both Lacey Heights and Stoner Prairie.
Okay.
So when you get down under Stoner Prairie Park Planning, and you've got Ben listed there, and then you've got yourself listed, I think
Okay.
neighborhoods capitalized in each one of those, which
Okay.
that is a nitpicky detail.
Well, better to address it now. Okay, I think we reviewed with you the plan here.
I've got a
where-
question, Sachin.
Yes.
Sort of related to the select your neighborhood. I don't think it's been asked before. I don't know the answer, but should the houses under construction in Stoner Prairie that have been sold, should they be getting this survey? I see arguments both for and against, so I'd like to know other people's thoughts.
It's a great question. And I think that also goes to Crescent Crossing because it's very
Yes.
fluid with people moving in. So, you know, I guess we'd have to make a determination, we as a committee, you know, if someone has joined the neighborhood association, if they paid a deposit, if, you know, how would they know and report, self-report? That's a good question. I'll let the people weigh in.
Yeah, my thought on one hand is, you know, if I was building right now and then I moved in and found out 2 weeks earlier that a survey went out and I didn't get the survey, I would be disappointed. But at the same time, I know at least one house in our neighborhood fell through multiple times, so we wouldn't want somebody to take the survey that ended up not moving in, as well as since they may not be familiar with the area, they don't know how they use the park today or what amenities are around. So yeah, I'm really not sure.
Good point. You know, I think one of the things that we talked about earlier is how this process will go is that, you know, we will do this survey to the selected neighborhoods that will be sent it to, but ultimately this is a public process. And in the end, you know, what we come up with is our first kind of round will be brought to the public, back to maybe even each neighborhood, again, for kind of buy-in. So in that sense, it kind of takes, for me, the edge off the idea that someone would maybe participate at this juncture, even if ultimately it falls through, because in a sense, you're maximizing the idea that, you know, they had a chance to participate. And in any case, the public at large will be able to participate later. So, you know, how concerned are we about the handful of people that might be?
You know, my recommendation would be to reach back to both of those developers, tell them what they have a confirmed offer in hand, that, you know, we'd certainly appreciate their input. And then they can identify when those new homeowners have met that benchmark. And it might be an exciting thing that they're able to say, you know, not only congratulations on your new home that's coming, but we're in the process of taking feedback on the park. You know, you need to respond in this time frame, and let those developers bring forward that opportunity, you know, based on what they know at a ground level about those, you know, those new neighbors.
Yeah, I think ideally that would work. I just don't feel like the developers really follow through with stuff like that, which has happened multiple times with both of the developments. So I don't know.
And when you say both of the developments, do you mean Crescent Crossing or do you mean the William Ryan?
Yeah, one for each. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
got it.
yeah, so William Ryan didn't get back to the city, and the Viridian didn't for the Crescent Crossing.
Okay.
I think the best we can hope for is that we do our part and try to get the info to those developers that they can get to residents. But, you know, ultimately, we're planning for the long term. This is for decades in the future, and there will be turnover no matter what. Some of us on this call may not, you know, live in Fitchburg in 5 years. So I think we'd be best serving the community as a whole by getting the most diverse, by getting the largest number of responses possible within the area. So I think that benefit far outweighs getting a response or two from somebody that may end up not purchasing a home. I think just get this in front of as many people in the relevant area as possible would get us the best results.
And I also think that the percentage of folks that would be that missed window is probably like 5% anyways. And so, you know, comparatively to the overall numbers of Seminole Forest, Lacey Heights, your neighborhood, those are all pretty established right now, and that's going to be the majority of the numbers anyways.
So let's move to the next item here, the first park space use priorities. And I will go into the edit pane here because if people want to, oh, that's what I was afraid would happen after all this time. So let me go to the edit pane here. And that way, if people want to wordsmith any of these questions, we can, you know, do that in real time if we develop a consensus around the item. Someone had mentioned feedback that could the slider here only has 3 settings, but that's something that's built into the survey tool that, you know, you go from one axis to a middle point to the other extreme, even though it's a 4.5 4-point scale.
One thing that we talked about earlier is that separation of existing versus new from a prioritization, and I think we should separate those out. So maybe we just add that as a existing priority or existing facilities versus kind of new priorities. I think we should do that. I thought that was a good recommendation. Maybe someone else has some input on that, but you know, there's not that many amenities currently. So, you know, I think maybe we took that into consideration, but we had also talked about the potential for like upgrading the baseball diamond to be like a little league field or something, right? Like, is that, Janelle had talked about sort of future use of rec that the neighborhoods might want, or even the city might prioritize. So, I mean, maybe that becomes just part of that question, I guess.
Yeah, I made that comment. I was just, even if, I don't know what's possible with the survey, but even if you just list the existing stuff first, new ideas second. That
We could
easier.
we could break up the question into two new questions: use priorities of existing equipment and use priorities for potentially new use cases. So I mean that might be the cleanest.
Sure.
I say this in total jest. We don't have anything for walking cats. No comment needed.
We can always start a club.
It'll be a small club. There'll be a lot of duress there.
There was a suggestion about, and I'm sorry if this hasn't already been covered, but I think where we're talking about the various ways of walking, jogging, etc., should we leave the question off about dog walking? Because if you're walking with your dog or without your dog, you're still walking. Does it matter? Let me know if there was a reason that I'm missing, and I'm happy to let it go, but it's a question that came up.
Yeah, as Ben talked about before, one of the points of reference for us was other, park surveys. And going back to the polling we had done in our neighborhood about people's wants and needs, and thinking about water being brought to the shelter, right? They make these drinking fountains where there's a little bowl for a dog on the bottom, right? So you could give dog up. And someone at some point had mentioned something about, and as someone who thinks a lot about economics, and whether you incentivize a behavior that you don't want, but someone had brought the idea of providing trash bags for dogs, which personally I think it may incentivize people to not bring trash bags with them, hoping that they're there. And then what happens the day that they don't have the doggy bags available, and then that's another cost or something. But that's the reason why that was a separate item, to get a sense for how much do people use that for walking dogs.
I see.
And I think that was part of my intention as well. There might be certain elements that we have exactly what I had in mind was, would we set it up to have like a dog dish container in place, some super minor things like that would be appreciated by dog owners.
So you're saying that would be more specific in the questions, Janelle?
I think if you were walking a dog and we saw a number of people that walked dogs, then you have an opportunity to say, this is important to this group of folks.
Sure.
We could probably spend $200 and it would mean the world to the people that have dogs just by having a simple drinking container that had a little chain. So when you got to the park, you could give your dog a drink. We wouldn't have to do huge things. We wouldn't have to spend huge dollars to have high impact with that, with these, in these certain areas.
Got it.
Any other comments on any other of these use priorities? Anything missing that that should be there? I mean, I think that's one of the things, and I know it's a compromise, right? You put too many things there, and the survey becomes fatiguing. But on the other hand, going back to the comments about not leading things, we want to have it open to represent what we think has been kind of brought up and at the various forums about what people may want. A curated list, which is also brought up, but a representative curated list.
So my English teacher is coming out again. When we get into the 3-season bathroom option at the park, I think we want to close parentheses after currently 1 seasonal. And we may want to just say currently after 1 season. Oh, I see. My apologies. I didn't see the section under there. And okay. It's probably the same case with park volunteers where we've got a comma after planting trees. There's probably more. Yep.
Yeah.
My apologies.
The only other question I had was, we did have in this section, number 4, a slider for path lighting. But I didn't see anything reflect that in the lower sections where it was talking about what the costs might be. I mean, I think it'd be great. I think there'd also be a similar question to include along with path lighting would be lighting for the baseball field or lighting for, you know, one soccer field for night games. I know Moof would love that. So
Any other comments on that? Everyone in agreement? We can try to find those cost estimates and include that so it corresponds on the budget side. And Mark, were you saying that you'd also then like to be a separate priority of not only path lighting, but also field lighting?
yeah, I think it'd be interesting to find out if that's a priority.
Okay.
I have a question, and I'm going to ask Katie McDonald to perhaps help answer it because she's a park planner. And on the one hand, we start out at the beginning identifying that there's a park within a half a mile, just around a half mile, that has tennis courts, but it's just 2 tennis courts. And we talk about we don't want to duplicate what's already there. But and it's striped for pickleball, and my husband reports there's the same 4 women every morning playing pickleball, and they sweep off before they start. It's well used, starting in the early morning hours. So that I'm seeing it here on this list, and I'm not saying it's a good idea or a bad idea, but you have a population calculation that you use to say for X number of people, so many tennis courts is appropriate. Katie.
I don't think there's a given population or age group in the neighborhood that we aim for tennis courts. It seems to depend on the community. As you've already stated, a lot of the time it has to do with proximity.
Okay. Thank you. So it's there, and it's a good question to ask, and we'll see what kind of a response. Does it say pickleball up there? I don't have my binoculars with me. Does it say pickleball at all, or does it just say tennis courts?
It says pickleball right under tennis courts.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Okay. I just thought of one other thing. There was a note I wrote somewhere. Can we put on this questionnaire per household, what are the age ranges of the people that live there? Because then you know how many have lots of little children. Does it help to have that information? I always seem to be filling it out when I answer any kind of survey.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we discussed as a committee is how would we act on that? And if they're answering for their household, are we already, trying, in a sense, getting that based on their answers for their priorities, in a sense, right? So, are we gonna act on that information in a way versus adding another question and an item for someone to complete? That was the point of leaving that out.
Okay. Katie, is there if you're being given data, does that help you? How many of the survey respondents or of the people we know in the area are of certain age ranges?
I mean, I guess I could see it being a useful bit of information, although I think there are concerns potentially that go back to the anonymity of the survey as well.
True. Well, and it also, you don't know what you don't know, and maybe the family that has 4 children never had time to fill out the survey. So thank you for your answers. It was just a question.
This is kind of a hair-splitting question, but I'm wondering if in the benches and seating, if we also want to say benches, comma, seating, comma, like a table and chairs as well, so that they also think about, a picnic table or something of that nature.
I can include benches, seating, picnic tables.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this?
The only other
Okay.
small one that I'd like is perhaps to move in the last two line items, to move no alcohol to the first sentence and alcohol to the first sentence. And so we highlight the difference between those two items.
Okay. That was hard to word, so I'll work on that. But that'll make it more clear.
Yeah, I can
Okay.
appreciate how that would be a tough one to get wording on.
So here we are at the budget priorities question. I think, you know, it goes with the discussion so far that these numbers, we may just need to make sure everyone feels comfortable with these numbers in a sense of what we're saying, the small shelter portion out of the budget or the intermediate shelter portion out of the budget could be. So we'll work with city engineering and see what we can get there and feeling comfortable with sharing something. So that's already noted.
I liked the way this section had the running total at the bottom, so that, you know, you can't just fully pay for everything. You have to actually prioritize and stay within your budget.
I personally liked this for the same reasons. I mean, it gave me a sense of, you know, I look and say, holy smokes, $650 for a picnic table. But then I also need to think about how I'm going to spend that money.
Anything missing from this? Mark, I noted your point about the path lighting and the field lighting. Anything else? And Sue, for the shared use bike walking path, we'll make sure it's $25 for a 10-foot wide path.
It wouldn't have mattered to probably 98 to 100% of the people filling out the survey, but it just popped in my head a couple of times over the last week. Thank you.
I think someone had said that the half-court basketball, someone on tonight's call, I think kind of mentioned this idea. I think it was probably Ben, actually. Maybe we should just make that, give the options, right? Half-court, full court. So we can figure that out. It's one of those things where it's probably not 30,000. If you do the full court, it's probably 25,000 or 27,000, but it's all ballpark anyways.
I have
and that is the ballpark.
Question, and I am not saying it shouldn't be a question in the survey, but at the school, I think there are 7 to 9 basketball backstops of varying heights, and I appreciate that they're not brand new, but eventually whatever you put here won't be brand new either. What's at Wildwood Park is not brand new. So what drove the decision to include a basketball for these options for this survey?
Yeah, good question. I think, again, we have to start somewhere, and just like the shelter is being driven by the well site, I don't think this is a blank slate, and that's something that came up in our discussions last year as a community of Stoner Prairie, is that the basketball courts aren't really at the school, maybe regulation height, in great shape, necessarily accessible because the school hours are there. So, for a variety of reasons, that seems to be a popular choice.
And there was limited options around Fitchburg for full court basketball. There's the random hoops here and there, but there aren't any painted basketball courts for people that want to play a pickup game.
Right.
It's very limited.
Yeah, I agree. I saw at the school, when we walked that, there seems to be one full court with taller rims, but I don't know if they're a height that's regulation or pleases people. It looked like it was for older kids at the very least. But, leaving, I'm not suggesting you don't ask in the survey. I just was curious about the driving background. Thank you.
I think I've heard similar things to what Mark mentioned. And there was at one point a hope that we would hear back from the middle school that they had planned on refreshing that space, but I don't think that that's part of their budget plans. And so it is one of the reasons this was brought forward is I think people would like to have something that's updated, something that's standard, a variety of reasons that they didn't feel like they were seeing entirely what they were hoping for. And so that's why this particular one was called out in the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Mark's right with like at least like a standard court. I think over there's 2 hoops, but I don't think it's like a standard size court with all the right stuff. If anybody's been over to Fireman's Park in Verona, they've got a pretty nice setup there, and I know they actually do quite a bit of rec programs for youth, for the kids, doing different skills things and 3-on-3 leagues and stuff like that. So
Okay.
That's just a frame of reference of what some other places have done.
Thank you.
Are questions 4 and 5 both required? Or could you do one, not the other? Oh, you're on mute.
Only 18 months of this. Yeah, they're both required.
Okay. I'm just asking because the budget one was hard for me to fill out, so I might be inclined to just skip it and at least submit 4. Maybe other people won't have a hard time with it.
Maybe, the city is doing outreach and helping people with financial literacy as part of completing the survey as well. So we can see that as another good gesture coming out of this process. So I think, you could easily just put 0.
Well, that's true. Okay.
Yeah.
I personally want to see how many parents show up and start using the zip line.
I think you'll be, depending on your view of that, pleasantly surprised or unpleasantly surprised. I don't know what you would react to that, but
I will be interested to see how many times alcohol is involved with the zip line.
No other comments on this. I'll move forward. So there's only one question in the whole survey that has what we call question logic. This was, if you answered Stone or Prairie for the question about neighborhood, then you would be seeing this question about, the opportunities and the cost of the increased demand on traffic and parking resulting from a shelter and these additional amenities. And so while there's a first question for everyone about whether they like, dedicated parking as kind of a budget priority and how much you want to give for that question, by the way, starts at 4 because that's the number of spots that we thought would be the minimum necessary for disability access and for city staff to be able to pull into adjacent to the shelter. That would have a cost going to something that's a moderate sized lot. And so that, I don't know if anyone has any feedback on this, but the Stone or Prairie residents are showing this because that's come up many times as a consideration for the community about these improvements. And, obviously it came up with the discussion of even these league players and MUFA. So that's the only question that has question logic in the survey instrument. And then the last question is open-ended for comments for the ad hoc committee as a whole. Any questions or concerns here?
I don't have a question here, but please, I'm going back to page 2 because
Let me make sure if anyone has
yeah,
any
I'm sorry, you're
questions
right,
here.
absolutely.
Can you give me just a minute to read this quick?
Absolutely.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
So one question I would have regarding the parking, is it possible to have the city put up like no parking signs or something, like if we know there's gonna be heavy usage in the neighborhood?
Do you mean
Especially
on the street?
around some of the corners and things like that, where it's hard to see already. And we've seen this week where, you know, there's quite a few cars parked there, and it's kind of it's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, is that, which streets, can you tell me which they were?
Yeah, so it's
At
the
Scarlet,
end.
go ahead.
Yep, so it's right across, so it's right next to the existing little park. It's that curve right there.
Yeah,
And then I could also see an issue on the other curve coming down Wayfair,
were there
going to the
people,
right, which would
people
be
parked
right
on
in front
both,
of the new shelter.
and people
So it'd
parked
be the
on,
corners of Velt and Wayfair and the corners of Evoke and Scarlet.
Yep.
okay, but not where Jasmine ends and curves up and heads north? That's not what you're talking about?
I'm trying to think where Jasmine is.
That's where the tot lot is now. That's Jasmine. I mean, I'm sorry,
That's
that's
Scarlet.
Scarlet. Jasmine is
Yep.
the next one. That's Scarlet. Was
Yep, so
Scarlet,
it would be, Scarlet would be one of them. So we saw
Okay.
some cars parked this week multiple times when there wasn't even heavy usage of the lot.
and because this is a question I brought up on different parks projects and on this one, in the different context at Parks Commission, was there parking on both sides of the street? Were there cars using both sides of the street to park or just one?
Both.
Yeah, because the streets are a sort of a standard width for a neighborhood, yet there's an attraction of the park.
Yep.
And I understand that. So I am not involved at all in the traffic safety engineering, obviously, but it's something that I was told at the time when I raised questions in a different context that there would be that the city doesn't post no parking signs just because there's a park there. That said, this is your own unique situation, and it's something you can have a continued dialogue with the city about, especially, make your notes now and then see how it changes as the seasons change and into next year when there's even more people living there.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not necessarily saying no parking all the time. It's just, if it's just a car here and there, that's not a big deal. But if there's going to be, 50, 100 people coming in and, 20% park on the streets, that's a lot, especially considering how narrow, like you said, the streets are in the neighborhood. It's not like they're, wider like Sherrill Drive over by that other park.
Yeah, well,
So it
even Wildwood Park just down the way has a wider road at the park frontage than you have, than we see here. And it's a difference in planning perspectives over the ages. But I was given a hint, you can also compile those notes and provide them to your alder.
So, this is just, it's my opinion. First of all, I think it would be good to have a couple of spots available. And when I say a couple, I'm thinking whatever we need for a minimal requirement for ADA, for city staff, et cetera. Let's say for discussion's sake, that's 4, just to give a place to start, which kind of helps us control that space. And that anything that we are doing that is an event would be permitted anyways. And so they would probably be making a deposit for the shelter. They'd be working with Parks and Rec on an agreement, things of that nature. And so my hope is that we could have an agreement for that shelter that identifies that parking for events is at the schools. And so that traffic would be moved out of there. I'm not saying that that's going to be absolute, but at least it ties us into an agreement. And then my third piece of this is to say to whomever is on city staff, how do we manage this? Because I have, I stand there and I take a look at all of these littles that are over by the toddler park, and they're kind of coming and going, right? If we get a bunch of cars in their parking and a little one comes zipping out, that gets bad really fast. And so how do we, consider that in our planning process so we can avert putting those little ones in harm's way? That's my 2 cents. Maybe that.
I agree.
Worth.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would also add on to that. At one of the previous meetings, we said, oh, don't worry because people can park at the school or they can park at the church. And nobody's talked to the church yet. So I talked to Daniel Owen about it the other day, the pastor at the church, and he'd said nobody's mentioned it to him. And it's not a given that you can just have unlimited parking there. They'd be liable if things happened in the parking lot for a function at the park. So there'd have to be some type of city or event agreement with the church. So we need to factor in where people are going to be parking.
Yeah, I recall the context, there may have been more, but the one I recall, an idea being brought up early on about the church being involved if there was going to be something like a farmer's market, and that's kind of not on our radar anymore much with this survey anyway, but in that case where a farmer's market to survive has to draw a lot of people, would you have it at the church instead of at the park? So I agree, nobody should make promises about parking at the church because it's just sort of fallen off the dialogue.
Do we still have anybody from city staff on the call?
I'm here.
Hey, Scott, thanks for hanging with us late.
Yeah, there's a time limit to these meetings. It's an hour. You're a little bit over.
Do we need to put a quarter in that little machine and turn the knob? So how do we reach out to staff to get feedback on this business of parking and managing the shelter and keeping little tots safe?
Yeah, the parking regulations is really through other departments. So I think the idea that was suggested to, make the request to alders and then they kind of work through the engineering department and they might do traffic studies and they may have, some standards and those kinds of things. So I think that's really through the city staff and engineering and the traffic people within that department.
So Sachin and Sue, do I have your approval to put together an email to our alder and copy you on that?
Sure, yes.
Sachin, you're good with that? Hey, Sachin, do I still have you?
Sorry, yes.
Approved?
Yes, I think my AirPods died.
Yes.
Awesome. So as a matter of protocol, myself, I am going to send an email to Alder Randy asking for his assistance in coordinating with staff how we consider proper planning and engineering to protect our little tykes, given parking thoughts. And I'll put that email together here before Monday and copy both Sachin and Sue on that email. Everybody's good with that?
Yeah, don't feel like you have to limit that email to parking either. I know multiple neighbors have asked about speed limit signs or bump outs. We asked about that when we lived on Scarlet and we were told not going to happen because it's a dead end road, and then it wasn't a dead end road. And then now that we're over here, we were told it's not going to happen until construction trucks are gone. It needs to happen. Something needs to happen.
Okay.
'Cause it's a racetrack.
So we're going to just, treat this as a high level conversation, traffic engineering, including calming, including speed and other factors to ultimately protect the neighbors, including the little tots in the neighborhood.
But just to clarify, this doesn't impact I mean, are you, that's kind of separate, right? That's something else we're going to be doing, but it doesn't impact this question, right? The parking question.
That is
Agree.
correct. My
Okay.
intention is to get ahead of this at a bigger picture level.
Mhm.
This is one of my biggest concerns with that shelter, is how do we make sure that we, this is a younger neighborhood. There are little kids all over the place. How do we get ahead of this and make sure that, that we're safe? Yep, I'm good with the question.
Okay, so Sue, you had a point on, I think, question 2.
Oh, yes, and now I put the piece of paper away. I gotta find it. There's a question about youth age 13 plus, and then there's a couple questions about toddler play, but are we gonna ask a question about the age group in between, or tell me more about that?
Sure.
Or did I miss, I may have missed it, so you tell me.
Well, I think, on the topic of reciprocity and, the signature kind of asset this is with the, having the Verona area school equipment, really, when our neighborhood anyways had the discussions, we realized that, the toddler play equipment seems a little bit unenhanced and could use, as seems like, the replenishment, or what was the term used here earlier today? Refreshment. And then the elementary school, though, does a good job with the ages for elementary school, kindergarten through, through 6th grade, for that age group, 5 to 12, beyond toddlers. Toddlers quickly move on to that, what we call blue park, by the school anyways, pretty quickly. And so really what was the neighborhood thought was the missing things were really focusing on the toddler side, and then the youth and older. I mean, like Janelle said, she'll be on that zip line herself soon. And so, that
Not very
13 plus
long,
is really
though.
a broad range.
Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking, and have ended up being sort of two minds, because on the one hand, I've been one of the people to say, well, we've got all that equipment over there for that age group of school-age kids, but we are also planning for a park for a family to use, or one parent who's brought several children who may be of all three groups. And so if we ask them, and the designs that are created or discussion that follows may still bring us back to what you just said, which is absolutely valid, but there's also value, I think, in thinking about the idea of providing some equipment on the park space that encompasses all those age groups for the families that arrive and don't want to wonder where their kids are because they can't see them. They're so far away. So it would be a chance to say, yeah, I know you want to play at the blue park, but for right now, I'm here with the toddler and the teenager, and I want you on this equipment. A small amount of equipment that matches that age group might be appreciated by the families. And so that was my
Right,
reason.
and I think, again, many hours went into what we did last year as a neighborhood, and we all knew from the start that the budget would be limited. And so I think, these images, what we presented to the parks was the idea of, people need a place to kind of keep an eye on 3 different age sets. We've got a toddler park, we've got the blue park, the Stoner Prairie Elementary School Park, and then we've got this youth stuff here. That becomes then that corner, based on reciprocity, based on limited budget, the meeting point, the shelter, kind of a secondary, some people have been talking about a secondary kind of small shade structure there. People where you're dropping your kids off in the morning, you need a place, a little respite to hang out with other parents. That's why that's been shown the way it's been, very intentional, and it's not my vision. I think it's a very natural vision that's come from the actual neighbors who use these connecting spaces every day.
So you'd prefer to not add a question on that page 2 about the age group that's in between there?
I'm open to other people's thoughts too, of course.
Well, I guess there are no other thoughts.
Okay.
I can tell I'm running out of juice.
Yes. I have no further
So-
questions.
I think, that goes through the survey with this last open-ended question, and then there's a thank you page kind of letting people know where they can go to keep abreast of the park planning process, and just kind of confirming that their email, they don't ask them for their email address, but confirming so that, that they're completed the survey. I guess the next thing to talk about now that we reviewed the survey is kind of what are next steps and timeline around that. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Well, at this
The
point,
shelter question it needs to be addressed. I think July is when the city wants that. So I think we need to this time be very clear about the process from here on in terms of wrapping up the survey, transferring it to the city's account, sending it out, and whom it's going to.
well, whom it's going to, we will all find out together. And this was a long session, but everything that people contributed towards responding to the actual survey questions, I think you got a lot of good information, and it helped everybody understand to be able to talk about it as a group. And it seems like you've got something. I don't know of any reason why now you wouldn't go ahead and provide what you have here in a form to provide to the city, as long it's going to be following the same format as our trial run, correct? It's not going to look different except for that whatever we talked about today is now incorporated.
That's right. I think we're pending some clarifications on costs, so they're comfortable with what we share in terms of ballparks. And then how about the window of time that we want to give people once this goes out?
I think that if we communicate to folks that, we've got responsibilities to make a decision about this shelter, whether we're going to do it or not, and then we have to reverse engineer from what the city needs so that they understand why we're getting this now, why we need to turn it around quickly. There are things that come behind us that all still need to get done. Once we hear from them, I would say the sooner the better to get that out. If there's a way to kind of have that introductory paragraph so they can appreciate why we've got a short window on this, that might be helpful.
So is 7 days of time? I mean, people are on Facebook. I think Lucas and Kelly and in our neighborhood where we don't have an HOA, Mark and Garrett have agreed to kind of make sure the neighborhood is canvassed. We'll reach out to developers as well. But given it's a very short instrument anyways, maybe 10 minutes to complete it. I think, is that a reasonable amount of time? And we have to lay all these things out to send it out. We have to know when the link becomes active, when it closes. And so I just want to be very clear on the process from here on out. This is my first time I've served on a city committee like this, done others, but I'm not sure what kind of business with the open meeting comments, is this committee allowed to work via email where everyone in the committee is included on that email where, do people expect now, because it's become so contentious, a revised draft of the survey before it goes out? or we'll trust that Chad will look at it and make sure it, reflects this discussion in the minutes, and then he will post it once he is satisfied with that.
Well,
I think we're pretty clear on what we've agreed to here. I can't speak for anybody else.
Chad can look at it. I don't know that it would be a problem to do it any other way, although, at the same time, someone might say, boy, I was positive that question was not going to be there, but at a certain point, we have to let it go. But let's all, try to be true to what we've said, and then we can.
Well, Chad's been here hanging on.
Yeah, he's been.
So he knows what was said too,
And he's got
he can be the quality control.
He's got a 3-hour
of
tape he
this.
can look at, or 4-hour tape to look at, just in case he wants to double check. But the other question was 7 days worth of time for respondents, and that's what seems right, because sometimes if you give people too long, they think they're gonna get around to it, and then they don't. So.
Well, and the other thing that we've got here is we've got to balance some vacation into this, right? So if we've got folks that are out of the area, I think being gone for 7 days is not uncommon. So we're going to catch them
10 days
before. Well, I think even 8 days would be fine, right? Because most people take vacation for 5 days, generally speaking, unless it's something exceptional. So, but I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to split hairs. I'm going to follow the teams on that.
Well, if we gave it 10 days, and that would catch more people and not string them along too long, that's not going to break the bank on our timing to let the engineering department know about the park shelter. So I think 10 days is probably fair, and it doesn't destroy a requirement that we've made for ourselves to get it done before the end of July.
Sachin, how does it feel to you?
That's fine. It feels fine. I don't think Ben is here, which I can't blame him for at this amount of time now. So just to clarify, Ben and I will revise the survey with the feedback given tonight and what the agreements we've come to. I will transfer that finished survey to Chad. Chad will make sure it complies with what we talked about, and then Chad will send out the link. And then the neighborhoods will, and by that time we should know which neighborhoods too will be surveyed, because that's a pending question. And then Chad will, and the city will then notify the neighborhoods. We will create a QR code and that can be printed out to share with families that may not be on the Facebook groups as we go door to door for neighborhoods like ours where we don't have a HOA and not everyone might be on Facebook for a variety of reasons. So off that link, we will do that. Although, for anyone listening in on this call, that the survey instrument just really works best because of the sliders and the graphics on a PC, Mac, a larger screen, not a small iPhone or device like that. Even a small tablet might not work so well. So people should be prepared to take the survey on a laptop, on a large laptop or on a PC desktop.
I just had a thought as you were talking to, when people are filling this out and they're filling out their address, that already, well, it makes it complicated, but that also tells, we know what neighborhood they're in. So if you're in a hurry and you haven't gotten the answer about which neighborhoods, it's going to, they don't have to identify that if they're identifying the street they live on and the house number.
But we won't connect to the cities. We're kind of taking it that people aren't going to put in a false address. Like there's no check that way that someone puts, I live on 13.5 Scarlet, and the survey is not connected to a city database to know, that address does not or does exist, and or that, which neighborhood that Scarlet belongs to. That's a self-selection, and at some point we have to let some of this go and count on people's good faith efforts, but have some back end to look for obvious duplicates and things like that.
Well, right, I'm sorry, I hope you didn't think I was saying don't have people report their addresses, because we should. I was saying.
Not what I'm saying, but the questions don't talk to each other and to the city database about, street addresses or geographic information system like Access Dane or anything like that. It's just self-reported.
So you're saying that regardless, you want that last question in where people are gonna do a drop-down bar and say, I live in Lacey Heights versus I live in Seminole Forest?
Correct.
So for planning purposes, are we thinking that this thing may be out by, for example, the 25th of June? And so we would be getting responses back no later than, let's say, the 6th of July? Or what are our general thoughts on this?
I would just ask for some consideration on both the front end and the back end, for me to get, from the city side, get this up. And then on the back end, I'm not sure how this system compiles results and all of that. Maybe it's a very simple, simple process. But in terms of, collecting that and, I know we have a meeting, third Wednesday in July. So just keeping that in mind as well, that we don't want to be right up against that meeting deadline to get the results tabulated. So.
Scott, or sorry, Chad, the system is pretty clean. I mean, that's one of the reasons we chose this platform, is that the results will be easy for people to show, and the kinds of instruments we've chosen to assess about in terms of these budgets and sliders and stuff, they're pretty clean in terms of the reporting. The open-ended questions, we have open-ended questions, we'll have to slog through those, but they'll be in one spot for everyone to read through. So, yeah. By response, I will share that with you, of course, but, so you have a sense for that, what it'll look like on the back end.
When does the city need to know our decision on if we're going to do the shelter and a proposed design on that shelter?
Engineering had indicated, I think it was end of July, that they needed, clarification on moving forward.
And does that clarification include design, or is that just a yes or a no?
I believe that was a yes.
Yes or-
Yes or no.
Okay.
If I can clarify, I think it was a little bit, a little bit more, if I recall correctly, they wanted to kind of know the size of the number of bathrooms, for instance, right? And so I think, small shelter versus big shelter and some aspects of design were called for. And I'll go back to the idea of the renders, but I think people have to have a sense for the scale. And so, that was done intentionally to provide that, given these constraints and interests that the city has in knowing what people want.
Well, they would definitely need to know how many stalls, and that a water fountain, a spigot for a hose spigot, and then whether or not we would, and I think we've already pretty much answered it for ourselves. We cannot do what Hugo Jamestown did. There is no way, unless that's the end of our budget. So then you're just talking about, do you have a detached shelter that's fairly simple, an attached shelter that's fairly simple, large, medium? So.
Wait, I have clarification, right? Because why can't we do what Hugo Jamestown did?
Expense.
All our money would be gone. I mean, we can ask, the question is there, but when we get our answers back, we're also going to have to talk about money. So,
who does the actual design of the shelter? Like, once we get big picture what we want, does the city do all that? Scott and Chad?
No, typically what will happen is that you'll have a budget, and that budget, for discussion's sake, gonna pick a rough number, $500,000. Typically somewhere around 5% will go into engineering, into architecture. And then, for example, this last one, the design work was done by a firm called Angus Young, or specifically the Hugo Jamestown one was done. So that's usually where those dollars end up being distributed within the sum total. I don't know if we still have, who all we have on the phone, if anybody can speak to normally how those dollars get broken out? Do we have anybody that can talk to those details? No. So yeah, it's my understanding, Garrett, that, you know, again, $500,000, you take, I think it's either 5% total that goes to engineering and architecture, or it's 5% engineering and 5% architecture that comes out of that total for those services.
Okay, yeah, well, I think it might be good to have like bullet points or a list of what items we need to have by the end of July, just so we're not, you know, scrambling to try to figure some stuff out. So I guess I'm not totally clear, but if Chad and Scott think we're good, then obviously we'll, you know, trust them.
I agree with that. I'd also like to ask that to be our primary focus for the next meeting, is the discussion of that shelter, because that's going to be our quorum. And so that'll be our night to kind of go through, I think, the survey findings, and then, you know, we can discuss survey, but I think we need to be prepared to make decisions around that shelter also. It's my 2 cents.
Agreed. Is there anything else on the topic of item 5C, draft survey discussion? Item 6 is report from department. Scott, you going to tell us a story? Chad?
Please keep it short.
Chad?
For the sake of time, no report.
Got it.
Thank you.
And Chad? Nothing to add, Chad?
I'm good.
Okay. Announcement, next meeting is July 21st, and I'll have an emotion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
In favor of adjournment?
Aye.
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 It is 10:55. Thank you, everybody.